Okay, well, now that we have some context, both biblical and historical, I want to start unpacking a very tricky topic, which is pronunciation. Pronunciation of the sacred name is very, very debated, and there are so many interpretations. For example, Yahweh, 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 Yahawashi, which is the Black Israelite fake Hebrew movement, Yehovah, which is the rabbinic system, Jehovah, the King James, and so on and so forth. There's probably another 10 variations on that. There's many possibilities, because as you'll soon learn, original Hebrew did not write down vowels. The pronunciation was always just understood. And so when you have vowels, although there are clues as to how to pronounce the divine name, when you have letters, it's not necessarily clear initially whether there's an E or an O or an A or so on and so forth. So this is the problem that we're dealing with, why there's so many variations. Because when you have Yod He Vav He, is it Yahovah, Yahweh, Yehovah? Like, which one is it? What possible combination is there? Of course, there's many possible combinations if you don't have context. Now, some general history just to review with you on this issue. Original Hebrew, like I said, didn't have vowels written down, just consonants, and certain letters could act as vowels. Yod He Vav He are examples. But vowels were transmitted orally through culture and through understanding. Around the 3rd century BC, there was Hellenization through the Greeks, which is why the Septuagint was written, because people stopped speaking original Hebrew. Of course, the Jews were taken over by all these cultures, and so the alphabet was in flux constantly. They eventually migrated to kind of a more Aramaic square script alphabet, which eventually led to Mishnaic script, which eventually led to Masoretic script, which is today. I cover that in my Masoretic psyop. But true Hebrew stopped being used a long time ago. The name also was stopped from being pronounced because of the rabbinic system. They used it during the priestly benediction of number 6, once per day by the high priest only, and 10 times a day on the Day of Atonement. But again, these were rabbinic system things that had taken over by that time that were creating superstitions and prohibitions on pronouncing the divine name. By 70 AD, of course, the vocalization of the vowels had relatively gone. There was no record of it. And a lot of this had to do with the rabbinic system, which again began in Babylon, and it splintered away from the Levitical religion of the Hebrews and Israelites. See my Masoretic episode, see my Jews documentary, and so on. We want to break down some history of the name, and this is, if I can find it here, so many tabs, and when you minimize the window, it's even like teeny tiny. This is from Nazarenesoftheworld.info. Great article. It's titled Nazarenes and the Name Yahweh. It's by James Trim. This is a stone. You can see the Proto-Hebrew script on there. This is a stone inscription. Gott's Wunderbar name, Teal 2, U2. Doesn't really say where it's from. Anyway, one of the major distinctions between Nazarene Judaism and mainline Judaism of the 1st century was in regard to their usage of the name of Yahweh. While mainline Judaism had limited and in some cases even banned the use of the name, Nazarenes were at times persecuted for not participating in this banning the name. Although the use of the name Yahweh was clearly commonplace in the Tanakh times, Old Testament times, by the 1st century, the name was used only in the temple. Even when reading the scriptures, mainline Judaism used euphemisms or substitutions instead of pronouncing the name. According to the Talmud, after the time of Simon the Just, a contemporary of Alexander the Great, the priests stopped using the name in the blessings. The ban on the name, however, did not continue in this form. Later in the Second Temple era, the name was used, but only in the temple, as the Mishnah states. And it tells you from the Talmud here. In fact, the name was used in the temple even in giving greetings, as the Mishnah states, speaking of the behavior of the temple grounds. Now in Ruth 2:4 it says, "And see, Boaz had come from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, Yahweh be with you. And they answered him, Yahweh bless you." So people in the Old Testament times were speaking the divine name left and right. It wasn't considered blasphemy or to take God's name in vain to use the name that God given you. God wanted an intimate connection with his people, which is very interesting. But of course, Rabbinic Judaism and religion doesn't want you to have connection with God. The first century Jewish historian Josephus mentions the ban on using the name of Yahweh. Josephus, writing on the events of Exodus 3, states the following: "Whereupon God declared to him, Moses, his holy name, which had never been discovered to men before, concerning which it is not lawful for me to say any more." So Josephus documents that by his time, when he wrote Antiquities, it wasn't lawful for him to say the divine name out loud, unless maybe in some sort of special context. This ban on speaking the name of Yahweh seems to have been almost universal by the first century. Even the nonconformists of the Qumran community, generally held to be Essenes, held to the ban. The Manual of Discipline states, anyone who speaks aloud the Most High name of God, whether in cursing or as in blurt in time of trial, or for any reason, or while he is reading a book or praying, is to be expelled, never again to return to the society of Yahad. This is from the Qumran Essenes. After the Romans destroyed the temple in 70 AD, Pharisaic Judaism banned the use of the name Yahweh altogether. This is from someplace in the Talmud. The new halakha was that the name was to be hidden and to be kept secret. Keep this in mind when we get to the rabbis. That the practice of using euphemisms in place of the name of Yahweh began at a very early date, long before the first century, is made clear from the three important sources: the Septuagint, the Psalms, and the Book of Daniel. The Septuagint is a Greek translation of the Tanakh, which was made around 250 BC. And of course, we talked quite about this in the Masoretic video. There is much debate as to whether the Septuagint originally contained the name of Yahweh or simply euphemisms for the name. However, the Septuagint translators paraphrased Leviticus 24:16, or 15 in Jewish copies, in such a way as to make it clear that the ban on the name existed by the time the Septuagint was translated. So even when the Septuagint was translated in the 200s BC, they were already starting to fool around with banning people from speaking the name. They, i.e. the Pharisees. The Hebrew text of Leviticus 24:16 reads in English, "And whoever blasphemes the name of Yahweh shall be surely put to death." However, the Septuagint translators paraphrase the text to mean the following: "And he that names the name of the Lord, let him die the death." This is probably in Greek as Kyrios, like Lord. So what is the point? The Jews who translated this, they were faithful Jews, did not keep the name Yahweh in there by that point in time or tried to transliterate it in any way because they were afraid of the ban. So they paraphrased. This paraphrase makes it clear that the ban on the name existed at the time of the Septuagint was translated. Further evidence that the ban in the name was very early, can be found by comparing Psalms 14 and 53. These two psalms are almost identical, except that Yahweh in verse 2, 4, and 6 and 7 of Psalm 14 has been changed to Elohim in Psalm 53. So there's two identical psalms practically. The difference is that they changed Yahweh to Elohim. This is an important piece of evidence which tells us many things. The practice of using euphemisms in place of the name of Yahweh predates the editing of the redaction of the Book of Psalms. So when this was edited, and they basically edited, they copied slightly differently on this psalm, and probably it had Yahweh in it, and they changed it to Elohim because of the superstitions. At the time of the Book of Psalms was edited, the practice of substitution existed but was not universal, since the name is used in most of the Psalms, including Psalm 53's twin, Psalm 14. I don't know when the Psalms were edited. That's something to look into. But either way, it tells you that something happened in the record. Final evidence of the ban on the use of the name Yahweh is much older than the first century, is found in the Aramaic sections of Daniel. So probably the Psalms were edited at some point in the first century. They were, made sure to be retranscribed or something. So, Book of Daniel. Although the name appears in the Hebrew portions of Daniel, it is conspicuously missing from the larger Aramaic portion of the book. So Daniel has Hebrew and Aramaic sections. The Hebrew, Yahweh appears, but the Aramaic, which is obviously later, the Yahweh doesn't appear. I wonder why. This tells us that by the time that Daniel was written, it was the custom of at least some people not to use the name in another language besides Hebrew, because they were afraid of taking the Lord's name in vain. Not only did mainline Judaism read substitutions such as Elohim and Adonai when they came to Yahweh in reading the Tanakh, ancient scribes of the Tanakh actually substituted in many places Adonai for Yahweh into the text itself. These in many translations are printed as Lord. So again, some people say this is a conspiracy. I'm inclined to believe that in the beginning it probably wasn't a conspiracy. They were just being superstitious and legalist and afraid to sin. And that led to making some of these substitutions where the original scriptures had Yahweh, Yahweh, Yahweh. That was everywhere. God wants you to know his name in everything and to be intimately connected to him through that. The official list given in the Masorah contained 134 instances as follows of basically them substituting Adonai for Yahweh. So those instances are in Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Joshua, Judges, Kings 1 and 2, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Amos, Zechariah, Micah, Malachi, Psalms, and Daniel, Lamentations, Ezra, Nehemiah. So practically almost the entire Bible, it seems like. Where verses were written twice or more, such as Exodus 34:9, means that it has been changed 2 times within the same verse. So in those cases, you can look at these yourself. I'll link this in the references section. You can do a little more digging if you want. But if he's written it like this, then that means there are multiple substitutions within the same verse. Why the ban? Some people who enacted the ban on the use of the name in the mainline Judaism did so out of extreme, though misguided reverence for the name. The reasoning behind the ban was based on Exodus 20, verse 7, which says, "You shall not take the name of Yahweh your God in vain," and Leviticus 22:32, which says, "You shall not profane my holy name." These 2 commandments, when brought together with the tradition recorded in the Mishnah to make a hedge about the Torah, resulted in a custom of not pronouncing the name at all, thus eliminating any chance of profaning the name by taking it in vain. This is an example of religion and the logic of religion. Was the ban scriptural? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. This seems to have been the case with the ban on the name of Yahweh. In the Torah, Yahweh states, Exodus 9:16, "For this reason I have raised you up in order to show you my power, in order to declare my name in all the earth." Exodus 9:16 with Pharaoh. Which again, if you stumble over God being sovereign, then God hardening Pharaoh's heart just to destroy him in front of the Israelites so the Israelites could marvel at God's power, people are going to really stumble over that and say, you see, God must be an evil God in the Old Testament because they don't get it. Moving on. Thus, the ban on the use of the name conflicts directly with the Torah itself, because the Torah says God's name is to be proclaimed throughout the world. There is a direct contradiction between the rabbinical precept that the name should be hidden and kept secret, and the Torah precept that the name should be declared in all the earth. Thank you. The rabbinic system has nothing to do with the Torah. It's a rebellion to the Torah. The Tanakh speaks of apostates, Jeremiah 23:27, who try to make my people forget my name. I wonder if that was also a prophecy. The precept of keeping the name secret also conflicts with other Tanakh passages. Isaiah 52 verse 6 says, "My people shall know my name." My people will know my name because I want an intimate connection with them. Psalm 9 verse 10, "And those who know your name trust in you." Psalm 91:14, "Because he cleaves to me in love, therefore I deliver him. I set him on high because he has known my name." Now, of course, these things aren't about physical pronunciation, but really it's about knowing who God is. But part of that is also knowing God's name in some sense, isn't it? At least in the Old Testament. If somebody's trying to hide God's name from you, that is not in alignment with what God has revealed about himself as somebody who condescends, who comes down to your level and wants an intimate relationship. Malachi 3:16, "A book of remembrance be written before him of those who fear Yahweh and those who think upon his name." Psalm 99 verse 3, "They praise your name, great and awesome, it is set apart." It is great and awesome when you realize what Yahweh really means. Psalm 145 verse 21, "My mouth speaks the praise of Yahweh, and let all flesh bless his set apart name forever and ever." Psalm 148 verse 13, "Let them praise the name of Yahweh." How can you praise the name of Yahweh if you're going to hide that name and turn it into Elohim or Lord or some other derivative. Plus, Rabbinic Judaism produced a tradition of reading euphemisms in place of Yahweh when reading the Tanakh, and even altered the text itself in places, changing Yahweh to Adonai, and which contained the 134 instances listed previously. This tradition also conflicts directly with the Torah itself. So initially it was, they were trying not to sin. And of course, over time, as the rabbinic system grew and religion, basically took over and splintered from the Levitical revealed word of God, they really cemented into these traditions. Deuteronomy 4 verse 2, never add to the word I command you, nor take from it. Deuteronomy 12 verse 32, do not add to the word, the Torah, which I command you, and do not take away from it. So the point is this, that what did they do? They took away and they added. Do you see the point? The substitutions that they did, God wanted you to write his name down. Therefore, it's not going to be blasphemy or taking his name in vain if you're doing what he's commanded you to do. To not take away or add to the Torah. Okay, well, God said not to take his name in vain, but now he's revealing his name and he wants the name written down. So that must be okay. Okay, he wants his name to be known and proclaimed. So when they developed this tradition of basically replacing God's name and try to keep it secret, especially by the 70 AD, they are in direct contradiction to the Torah. So people who say they're Torah keepers and they're all about Judaism or whatever other kind of things, you need to point them to the fact that, especially like Rabbinic Judaism, you need to point them to these verses and realize like Rabbinic Judaism is a rebellion to the Hebrew scriptures. Of course, they probably won't listen to you very long, but anyway, did the Nazarenes participate in the ban? Could John 17:6, which is the high priestly prayer, and 26, mean that Yeshua actually pronounced the name, where he says, I've manifested your name? The Toldot Yeshu, a hostile rabbinic parody on the gospel, records the following legend. This is, again, if you watch my Berean video where we talked about how the rabbis, again, God uses everything for the good. It's just profound sometimes where he uses these antichrist agents to reveal his glory. In the Berean video, I'm going to read this in just a second, but in the Berean video, we talked about how the Jews kept these copies in Hebrew of the Gospel of Matthew in order to debate Christians and to try to delegitimize Christ. But in the process of keeping them in Hebrew, they actually did Christians a favor because the Greek was lost in translation in the genealogies. I cover it in there. I won't talk about it too much here, but if you're confused on the genealogies of Christ, check out that video, the Berean video. So you can see how the Jews keeping Hebrew copies of the Gospel of Matthew actually ends up proving that Jesus is the Messiah, which is really funny. This is another example where you have this hostile rabbinic parody of the gospel, but God uses it in such a way to reveal to you a profound truth. So this legend goes like this. After King Janaeus, his wife Helene ruled over all Israel, in the temple was to be found the foundation stone on which were engraved the letters of God's ineffable name. This is a rabbinic legend. It's a parody, making fun of Jesus. Whoever learned the secret of the name and its use would be able to do whatever he wished. Therefore, the sages took measures so that no one should gain this knowledge. Lions of brass were bound to two iron pillars at the gate of the palace of the burnt offerings. Should anyone enter and learn the name, when he left, the lions would roar at him, and immediately the valuable secret would be forgotten. Yeshu, Jesus, came and learned the letters of the name. He wrote them upon the parchment, which he placed in an open cut on his thigh, and then drew the flesh over the parchment. As he left, the lions roared, and he forgot the secret. But when he came to his house, he reopened the cut in his flesh with a knife and lifted it out of the writing. Then he remembered and obtained the use of the letters. He gathered about himself 310 young men of Israel and accused those who spoke ill of his birth of being people who desired greatness and power for themselves. Yeshu proclaimed, I am the Messiah, and concerning me Isaiah prophesied and said, Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son and shall call his name Emmanuel. He quoted other messianic texts, insisting, David, my ancestor, prophesied concerning me. The Lord said to me, Thou art my son, this day I have begotten thee. The insurgents with him replied that if Yeshua was the Messiah, he should give them a convincing sign. They therefore brought to him a lame man who had never walked. Yeshua spoke over the man the letters of the ineffable name, and the leper was healed. Thereupon they worshipped him as the Messiah, the Son of the Highest. A similar legend about Yeshua appears in yada yada, some Talmudic writings. Now, Hugh Schoenfield theorizes in his book, according to the Hebrews, that Taldat Yeshu, which is this legend that I just read to you, is a hostile parody on the gospel according to the Hebrews. So while this legend sounds fantastic, there may be some truth at its root. Now, another passage in Matthew might also lead us to that direction. Matthew 26, 59 through 65. And the chief priests and the elders and all the council were seeking false witness against Yeshua to put him to death, but found none. Although many false witnesses came forward, they found none. But at last 2 false witnesses came forward and said, This one said, I am able to destroy the dwelling place of Elohim and to build it in 3 days. And the highest priest stood up and said to him, Have you no answer to make? What do these witnesses against you? What do these witness against you? But Yeshua remained silent. So the high priest said to him, I put you to oath by the living Elohim that you say to us, if you are the Messiah, the Son of Elohim. And Yeshua said to him, You have said it. Besides, I say to you, from now on you shall see the Son of Adam sitting at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest tore his garments, saying, He has blasphemed. Why do we need any more witnesses? See now, you have heard his blasphemy. Note the phrase temple of God in verse 61. This phrase never appears in the Tanakh, which always has temple of Yahweh. Also in verse 64, the power is a common euphemism for Yahweh, which would appear based on the fact that this verse combines Psalm 110 and Daniel 7, which is the vision of the Son of Man before the Ancient of Days, where Yahweh does appear in Psalm 110, verse 1, because Yahweh is the speaker. So what's the point? Well, the point is, could Yeshua have been being accused of blasphemy for having used the phrase temple of Yahweh in the original event that happened? Of course, it was recorded in Greek, and that information was lost in translation, especially with the rabbinic system and everything else. But could the original situation have been that he pronounced the divine name? Could he have aggravated and confirmed the charge by reciting Psalm 110 and Daniel 7:13 phrase with the name Yahweh pronounced? Maybe that's why they actually accused him of blasphemy, because he pronounced the divine name. And of course, they were rabbinic Pharisees, and they weren't pronouncing the divine name. And so that's just very interesting. The Mishnah sheds a great deal of light on the events of this trial. The Mishnah states, He who blasphemes is liable only when he has fully pronounced the divine name. So according to the rabbinic writings, you're only blaspheming if you actually pronounce the full divine name. Said Rabbi Joshua ben Korah, quote, On every day of the trial they examine the witnesses with a substitute name. Once the trial is over, they would not put him to death with the euphemism. So if he said like the power or, everything else, you're not liable to be put to death. But they put everyone out and asked the most important of the witnesses, saying to him, Say what exactly did you hear? And he says what he heard, and the judges stand on their feet and tear their clothing. Now from this passage in the Mishnah, we learn many things about Yeshua's trial. It was normal for witnesses to use a euphemism in his testimony of what Yeshua said. So this is so interesting that what's going on. The false witnesses that came forward said, Oh, we heard that he could destroy the temple of God and rebuild it. They didn't say temple of Yahweh because they didn't want to be accused of blasphemy. They said the temple of Elohim or Adonai or, who knows what substitution they used. But they used a substitution. And Jesus, when he testifies and he responds, he uses the name of God. And they accuse him of blasphemy. So it's just so bold. It's so interesting. We also know that a charge of blasphemy required that the offender had fully pronounced the divine name. So according to the rabbinic writings, you had to pronounce fully the divine name. It is therefore clear that Yeshua had been pronouncing the name of Yahweh. Very clear. Otherwise, they wouldn't have accused him of blasphemy. But he did it. And of course, they accused him of blasphemy, but he's calling to himself, really, Jesus is Yahweh. Normally, at the end of the trial, the room would have been emptied and the witness asked to repeat the blasphemy without the euphemism. However, in this case, Yeshua surprised everyone. He wanted his statement heard by all, so he repeated one of his quote-unquote blasphemous statements right there in the Beit Din. We know that he used the actual name and not the power here because it was called blasphemy, and would not have been unless Yeshua had fully pronounced the divine name. He wanted them to know, and he's proclaiming Yahweh because he is Yahweh. And of course, that fulfilled the prophecy of him being accused. That Yeshua also spoke the name of Yahweh as part of his quote-unquote blasphemy was clear from the phrase, the high priest tore his clothes, which agrees exactly with the halach, or the law, of the Mishnah, and the judges stand on their feet and tear their clothing. So the rabbinic writings reveal to us that something has been lost in translation with these Gospels. Of course, they're being Greek. Jesus did pronounce the divine name. And that is why they followed the rabbinic laws, basically standing up on your feet, tearing your clothes, pronouncing blasphemy, and so on. Yaakov Chetzadik, James the Just, the leader of the Nazarenes after Yeshua's death, also recited the exact phrase Yeshua recited. Hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven, which is a combination of Daniel 7:13 and Psalm 110, verse 1. And was killed for having made the statement according to Hegesippus, as quoted by Eusebius in his ecclesiastical history. So the leader of the Nazarenes proclaimed the same thing and was killed for it for the same reason, for blasphemy, which is recorded by Eusebius. Was he also killed for blaspheming the name of Yahweh? On yet another occasion, certain Jews, probably Pharisees, quote, made insurrection with one accord against Paul. This is in Acts 18:12. A ringleader of the Nazarenes in Acts. They said that he persuaded men to worship God contrary to the law in Acts 18, verse 13. Paul was later released with the Roman authorities, saying in verse 15, if it be a question of words and names and of your law, look you to it, for I will be no judge of such matters. So they're trying to get Paul to be killed or at least thrown in jail in some way. And the Roman authorities say, listen, if this is a question of your names and your words and your laws, we don't have anything to do with this. Which indicates that the reason they're accusing Paul may have to do with the divine name also. It seems then that Paul was accused of persuading men to worship God using the word/name of Yahweh, i.e., Jesus is Yahweh, guys. Do you get it? Get out of this religious system. And in these superstitions, Yahweh has come in flesh, which is profound, in contradiction to the ban on the name practiced by other sects of Judaism at the time. Yeah, the legalists hated Paul, and of course they hate him today too. Jeremiah 16, verse 21, they shall know my name is Yahweh. Isaiah 52, verse 6, my people shall know my name. There's also great prophetic significance to the fact that the name has been preserved, in part through archaeological digs, as the scriptures prophesy. Isaiah 29, verse 4, and you shall be brought down, you shall speak out of the ground, your speech will rise from down in the dust. Psalm 85, 11, truth shall spring out of the earth. We are living in wonderful times, as Yeshua tells us in Matthew 23, verse 39. For I say to you, from now on you shall by no means see me until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of Yahweh. And he probably used the divine name in these original events when he spoke. But again, these things are translated to Greek. Although Matthew, which is interesting because there are Hebrew copies of Matthew that were originally made by the Christians. The question is, in successive copying of these Hebrew copies, I haven't looked into this myself, was the divine name actually preserved? I'd be interested to find that out. Because the people who were doing the copying were, at least in more recent times, like the 1600s, 1500s, and so on, they were rabbinic system, so they would have every reason to continue with that superstition. But either way, probably the point is the original events that happened, Jesus pronounced the divine name, very much so, and so did Paul probably, and so did the original apostles, because God wanted to be known. And of course, the epitome of that is through Jesus Christ, and getting to know Yahweh as Jesus, as Yeshua, as God saves. Very profound. So, conclusion, sacred name was pronounced less and less because of rabbinic superstitions and traditions, contrary to the Torah and God's intentions. God wanted his name to be known by his people, to have an intimate connection, which is very ironic with this whole controversy that's going on right now, because people appeal to the same rabbinic traditions to basically say that God's name was such and such or such and such. And I've had people argue with me like, well, the Mishnah says, well, wait a minute. You're appealing to rabbinic traditions that wanted to hide God's name and make it a secret that only rabbis could get initiated into. You'll learn more about that in a second. Combine this with socio-political changes like Hellenization, the conquering of pagan empires and so on. The usage was lost. It went out of use by the mainstream. But we have to remember that God is sovereign, so whatever happens happens because he's allowed it to happen by his decree, and for a very important purpose, which is to further his glory in some form or fashion. So all of these things that happened were by design. God allowed them to happen, that he would be known specifically as Jesus. And of course, the gospel is for the whole world. So Jesus came, the word was made flesh. Now we have a name that we can refer to that can be translated in many different languages and pronunciations, and that name is known throughout the world. Everybody knows who Jesus is, most everybody. And of course, Jesus comes from Yeshua, which is God saves. That is the identity of this being, that God saves you. God saves you from death, saves you from your own destruction, from your own sin, from your own slavery. God saves. That's how God wants to be known, is that God saves. Now in Hebrew, where does this name come from? Well, we can look at it in Hebrew and in Greek. So in Hebrew, if we go to Exodus 3:14, this is the interlinear. And said God to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you. So when Moses was talking to God and asked for his name, God says, say this to them, I am who I am has sent you, which is not a perfect translation. The Hebrew is Eyeh asher eyeh, or Eyeh has sent me to you, which it can mean several things, but it all points to God's self-existence. But we're going to tackle that in just a second. This is from Wikipedia. I am that I am. I am that I am is a common English translation of the phrase Eyeh asher eyeh. Also, I am who I am. I will become what I choose to become. I am what I am. I am what I will be. I create whatever I create. I am the existing one. So there's a lot of ways that you could take this, but it all points to God's self-existent nature, who is unique. Only God is self-existent. So basically, God is telling Moses, tell them the self-existent one sent you. And of course, that phrase, Eyeh asher eyeh, is condensed into the 4 vowels, which is the tetragrammaton. Etymology. Eyeh asher eyeh is the first 3 responses given to Moses when he asked for God's name in the book of Exodus. The word Eyeh is first person singular imperfective form of haya, to be. And owing to the peculiarities of Hebrew grammar, means I am and I will be simultaneously, which is very interesting. The meaning of the longer phrase Eyeh asher eyeh is debated and might be seen as a promise, I will be with you, or a statement of incomparability, I am without equal. Biblical Hebrew did not distinguish between grammatical tenses. It instead had an aspectual system in which the perfect denoted any actions that have been completed, and the imperfect denoted any actions that are not yet completed. Additionally, if a verb form was prefixed with wa, with some sort of prefix, its aspect was inverted. A verb conjugated in the imperfect and prefixed by wa would read as the perfect, while a verb conjugated in the perfect and prefixed by wa would read as the imperfect. So depending if it had a prefix or not, the meaning could change. The word Eyeh is the first person singular imperfect form of haya, to be, which in modern Hebrew indicates the future tense, I will be. However, it lacks the prefix, which would necessitate this reading in biblical Hebrew. So in order for it to be I will be, it would need a prefix, but it doesn't have a prefix. It therefore may be translated as I am, but also as a modal form such as I may be, I would be, I could be, etc. Accordingly, the whole phrase can be rendered in English not only as I am that I am, but also I will be that I will be, or I will be who I will be, or I shall prove to be whatsoever I shall prove to be, or even I will be because I will be. Self-existence, such a profound thing to meditate on, and revealed to you in a name. Other renderings include Leser, I will be that I will be, Rotterdam, these are different translators, I will become whatsoever I please. Greek, ego eimi hoon, we'll look at this in the Greek language. I am the being in the Septuagint, and Philo in the Book of Revelation, or I am the existing one. Latin, ego sum qui sum, I am who I am. The word asher is a relative pronoun whose meaning depends on the immediate context, therefore that, who, which, or where are all possible translations of the word. An application of this phrase is used in the New Testament, has, but by the grace of God I am what I am. This is 1 Corinthians 15:10. So this is kind of a similar thing in Greek that's happening here. If he's not making an appeal to the divine name, it's just the same kind of grammar that's being used. Interpretation, I think that's all I had for this one. And we have another one for the Tetragrammaton. Also, Wikipedia, the Tetragrammaton, let's see, where are we at? That's right. This, you know what the Tetragrammaton is, it's a 4-letter Hebrew word, Yod He Vav He. And of course, the thing to know about this is the etymology, which is important. The Hebrew Bible explains it by the formula Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, which we looked at, the name of God revealed to Moses, Exodus 3:14. This would frame YHWH as a derivation from the Hebrew triconsonantal root Hayah, or HYH. To be, become, come to pass, with a third-person masculine prefix, yod, equivalent to the English he, in place of the first-person aleph, therefore affording translations as he who causes to exist, he who is. So haya is to be, and then you have a yod before that, yahaya, would be the root, is the theory, and that is basically like he who causes to be. He's the cause of being. Although this would elicit the form YH Yod He, but it's Yod He Vav He. So if it was from Haya, which is He Yod He, then we would expect the Tetragrammaton to be Yod He, but it's not. It's Yod He Vav He. To rectify this, some scholars propose that the Tetragrammaton represents a substitution of the medial Y, Yod, for Vav, an occasionally attested practice in biblical Hebrew, as both letters function as matras lecciones, which we'll look at later. They're basically consonants that can act as vowels. They're letters that can be vowels. Others propose that the Tetragrammaton derived instead from the triconsonantal root hawa, so he, vav, he, to be or to constitute, with the final form eliciting similar translations as those derived from haya. So whether it's from hawa or haya, and haya was substituted because in vav and yod are, substituted, that you can substitute these two together, who knows? But the point is it comes from to be, the source of being, a profound word that describes the nature of being with a prefix that determines a person, the one that causes things to be, and that is self-existent. As such, the consensus among scholars considers that the Tetragrammaton, Yod He Vav He, represents a verbal form, with the Y, Yod, representing the third masculine verbal prefix of the verb haya, to be, as indicated in the Hebrew Bible. So ya haya or ya hawa basically is the root, meaning personal prefix, with to be. Vocalization, this is something we'll come back to later. This is a Septuagint, and you can see iota, alpha, omega, transcription of the divine name as Yahu in the 1st century BCE. This is in the Septuagint, and they transcribed the divine name, the Jews, even though there was a prohibition. Seems that in some cases they were transcribing the letters into Greek so that you can have an understanding of the pronunciation, which we're going to come back to later. But it's transcribed iota, alpha, and omega, which is interesting. There's alpha and omega, right? I-A-O, Yao. Keep that in mind, Yao. I don't think I highlighted anything else here. Oh, I did, but for later. I think that's it. So, conclusion, Conclusion is what? God revealed his name to Moses as the self-existing one, the creator, the source of all life and being on earth and in the universe. There's many simultaneous meanings of God's name because of the way Hebrew language worked, which is very profound. I am the one who is, which is self-existence. I will be, meaning I'm going to accomplish all my purpose. He's sovereign. I am the being one. I am the source of life. So all these things together kind of paint a picture of who God is through that name, which is really profound. The tetragrammaton comes from the verb to be in Hebrew. We know that Moses is the one who wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, and we know that from John 5, verse 46. For if you believe Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote of me. So Moses, who had direct contact with God through the burning bush and received God's name, wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch. Therefore, when the name Yahweh appears in the Pentateuch, we know that this was intentional by Moses, and it was created from the name revealed to him in Exodus 3:14. Now, some other evidence that we have that tetragrammaton is not a rabbinic invention or evil or anything else is the following. This is from Wikipedia, and we'll look at these again in the future, but these are the Ketef Hinnom scrolls. Very fascinating discovery, also described as the Ketef Hinnom amulets, are the oldest surviving texts currently known from the Hebrew Bible, dated to around 600 BC. The text is written in Paleo-Hebrew, i.e. real Hebrew, not the Aramaic-derived square Jewish script from the Hebrew alphabet, more familiar to modern readers. At least they admit it, but they don't tell you the truth behind it either. It is from the book of Numbers in the Hebrew Bible and has been described as one of the most significant discoveries ever made for biblical studies. Now, the book of Numbers is in the Pentateuch, first 5 books, and you will see that this particular section, it's a blessing, and it has the name Yahweh. Yahweh bless you, because that was a thing. You had to use God's name and bless people, and of course not use it in vain, but when you're blessing someone, you're not blessing them in some generic, Lord or Master. You're blessing them in the name of God, because God is the one who brings blessings. Two silver scrolls were uncovered in 1979 at Ketef Hinnom, an archaeological site southwest of the old city of Jerusalem, and were found to contain a variation of the priestly blessing in number 6. The scrolls were dated paleographically to late 7th century or early 6th BC, placing them in the First Temple period. A very important discovery. Now, let's see if they have a little graphic of them somewhere. Maybe up here. Gosh, where do they have these things? They usually have... There we go. You can click on this. You can see this. Here's the name of Yahweh. It's, you can kind of see it. It's kind of... You can look this up on your own too, but here's Yahweh's name, and it's written here in Paleo Hebrew. So, they did not have a superstition before the first temple was destroyed to say God's name in a good context, in a blessing context. There wasn't this prohibition. So this proves that something changed as time went on. And of course, after the first temple was destroyed, you had Babylon, you had synagogues, you had the rabbis, the rabbinical system, you had things started to splinter off. I talk about that quite a bit. But this is the Ketef Hinnom scrolls. You should know them because they're a very important discovery that legitimizes the Bible. And, of course, legitimizes what we're talking about today, which is the sacred name. Now, let's look at the Greek. So we saw a transcription from, I think it was 100 BC, into the Greek, where they used iota, alpha, omega. And there are other similar things, too, because the Septuagint was translated by Jewish scholars before Christ. Very important. That's why it's a very important text. We saw some evidence previously of sacred name being translated by these Jews in phonetically, meaning they're transliterating it. Sometimes I believe they left it in an original Hebrew, and sometimes they transliterated it into vowels in Greek to where you could pronounce the sacred name. But obviously, again, by then, you also had these cultural prohibitions, and there was a lot of stuff going on. But Moses' interaction is also interesting in Greek. If we can pull this up. This is studylight.org. Interlinear Septuagint. This is Exodus 3:13. And God said to Moses, I am the one being. So in this way, in this sense, the English is rendered I am the one being, meaning I'm the one, I'm the self-existent one. But in Greek, it's ego eimi ho eimi. Ego eimi ho eimi, which is translated in English. It's not a perfect translation because, again, things get lost in translation. Is I am the one being, or I am the being one, meaning I'm the source of all being, which is very interesting. And he says, and said, thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, the one being has sent you. So ho eimi has sent you. A shortened version of it. So this is really important. Very, very important. We're going to look at another one too, because when you read the New Testament in Greek, you will see why it's important. This is Exodus 3, another rendition of the Septuagint, BibleBento.com. And let's see if we can find it. 3:14. I highlighted it somewhere here. And there it is. Thought I didn't highlight it for a second. Same thing. So let's take it from a little bit earlier. And say the God to Moses, I be the be, and say so state the son Israel, the be, send off away. So this is even more like word for word. That's why it's hard to understand interlinears. But what does it say? I be the be. Ego eimi ho on. That's another rendition. So it's ego eimi ho eimi, or ego eimi ho on. I be the be. Or say the ego eimi has sent you. Ego eimi has sent you to the sons of Israel. So it's ego eimi ho on, or ego eimi ho eimi has sent you. The shortened version would be ego eimi has sent you. I am has sent you, basically, in Greek. Now, why is all this super important? Well, here's actually another one. This is another interlinear. Let's look at it. Okay, couldn't minimize it, or I couldn't zoom in on this because the controls to zoom in are only available on full window. So I've maximized my window. You can see it. The text in question. This is another Septuagint rendition, and it says ego eimi ho on. Yeah, you can see that. And God said to Moses, I am the one being. And he said, thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, the one being has sent me to you. Ho on. This is ho on, or ego eimi ho on. Okay, this is very specific. Now, why is that important? Well, it's very important because if we go to the interlinear for John 8:58, where he's confronting the Pharisees, and they say, you're not even 40 years old. Said to them, Jesus, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. So before Abraham was, ego eimi. Now, why did the Jews pick up stones to stone him? Because he pronounced the divine name. Now, the question is, was he speaking to them in Greek, or is he speaking to them in Hebrew, and this is being related in Greek? And, of course, when it's related in Greek, it appeals to the Septuagint translation, but very likely he was speaking in Hebrew to them, and he pronounced the divine name, which either way, whether he was speaking in Greek or Hebrew, they picked up stones because they picked up what he was throwing down. He was claiming to be Yahweh, the self-existent creator. Now, you wouldn't understand that unless you looked at the Old Testament Greek in interlinear, how the Jews, before Christ, translated the passage in Exodus where Moses is speaking to Yahweh. And they translated it as ego eimi. Could be ego eimi ho on, ego eimi ho eimi. Either way, ego eimi is the shortened version. I am sent me to you. That's the shortened version. When Jesus speaks in the New Testament in John 8:58, he is making a direct appeal to that divine name. And he's not saying that's somebody different. He's saying, I am. Before Abraham was, I am. I exist. I am self-existent. And of course, they perceive that as blasphemy, which is why they picked up stones to stone him. So, conclusion. Greek translations of the scriptures confirm the same thing as the Hebrew ones, because the Greek translations mean, I am the source of all life, I am the being one, I am the one being, the unique creator. the self-existent one, and so on and so forth. So the point is that the Hebrew scriptures, it's not made up. People who say, oh, those are made up, the rabbis have made all that up. Well, no, not really. The rabbis tried to hide God's name, and the Greek translations of the Hebrew scriptures prove to you that when it's concerning the interaction with Moses and God, it's the same interaction. It's a statement of self-existence. I am the being one. However it translates to English, of course, there is no really good translation in English, but I am the self-existent one sent me to you. That would be kind of maybe a rough translation. Both in the Greek and Hebrew, the divine name has to do with self-existence and who God is as a unique being in the universe. Therefore, they're consistent with one another. It's not made up. It's not taken from pagan sources, which we'll look at later. The sacred name was revealed to Moses, and Moses wrote it down. And the Tetragrammaton is a shortened version based on the revelation that God gave to Moses that he is the unique self-existent being of the universe. Greeks confirm the same substance that the Hebrew confirms. And of course, we know the original Hebrew, like the Ketef Hinnom scrolls, had the Paleo script, which was very different from square script. Archaeological discoveries, like the Ketef Hinnom scrolls, like the manuscripts of the Septuagint, like in the 100 BC, where you see the transliteration of the name, prove that the pronunciation is a particular way. Yahweh, right? And of course, we'll look at that in greater detail soon enough. But the point is that they agree with each other. The Greek and the Hebrew agree with each other on this issue. Now, I want to talk really quick about the idea of verbal inspiration. Verbal inspiration is the idea that specific words were inspired into the Bible, and we have to know how to say those words, or we have to keep those words, otherwise it's corrupted. The sacred name people use this kind of idea and ideology to basically say that any pronunciation of God's name that's not right is idolatrous, that you're a heretic, that you're an apostate, that you're not praying to the right Jesus, and so on and so forth. Ironically, they're praying to the wrong Jesus because they deny Jesus as God, as the self-existent God of the universe. But anyway, that's besides the point. Most of the time. Some of them have some strange theories like the binitarians and so on, but either way, the point is that it's actually the other way around. Now, the KJV only movement suffers from this idea of verbal inspiration, and I have a whole video planned to expose it. It's this obsession with the exact pronunciation of the words and the exact words. It has to be these words because God came down and wrote these words. Well, no, they were written down by translators, and the KJV has many errors in it, of course. Doesn't mean that the Bible's erroneous. It means that translations are made by human beings, and they have errors and mistakes. And I think that's by design, to be honest with you, because I think that forces you to dig deeper into the Word. God wants you to have a relationship with knowledge and practice and research and learn and make mistakes. He wants you to do that because that's how you really get a relationship with His Word. Not by saying, oh, I have this translation, now I'm perfect, I just read it and then I'm fine. That's not how studying is done. But either way, the KJV onlyism movement is all about verbal inspiration. And the problem is that it takes people away from spiritual meanings. This sort of obsession over how words are written, which is very Talmudic, by the way, takes people away from seeing greater spiritual truths, and that's why it's Antichrist. It's designed to deceive you one way or another. Remember that the KJV has many errors, and yes, God preserved His Word, but not through the KJV Bible. God preserved the Bible, which is His revelation, which is the meaning of His plan of salvation, of who He is, what He's done. God has preserved these things, and certain things have been forgotten, but He's preserved them. And the things He has preserved are there, and they're discernible, regardless of the translation you have. Of course, if you have skills, most people don't have skills, and this is the problem. Even with a good translation, it doesn't matter. You need skills. So watch my Berean video and become a Fennec fox. But the point is that God is guiding people to the truth with His Spirit, not through specific manuscripts or texts or anything specifically, but rather through His Spirit, which cannot be labeled or put in a box. And unfortunately, the problem with this verbal inspiration attitude is it creates idolatry. It really does. It's funny because a lot of these sacred name people say that, oh, if you're pronouncing it wrong, you're worshiping an idol. Jesus is not true. It's Yeshua. Well, actually, you're making an idol out of something that isn't God. And in your own mind, you've created this false God, this false legalistic God that you worship through your own way. So it's the other way around. This is the funny part. Rabbinic Judaism is also very concerned with verbal inspiration and the sacred name and all these ways that you have to write letters, otherwise they don't have their magical effects. That's why I said it's the same spirit, folks. It's the same spirit guiding all these things. So these types of legalist things just come into play when we're talking about the sacred name. So you have to be aware of it. Of course, the response is that it is the meaning which matters, not the words. Yahweh, even if we didn't know how to pronounce it, the statement is of self-existence. God is a unique being in the universe because he's the only one that is self-existent, and therefore he is the source of all life. Yahweh was also revealed so that, as the name, so that Jesus, when he came around, could identify himself as that self-existent being. Do you understand? That name was revealed and written down so that when Jesus came, which is the name that God wants you to know, God saves, Jesus could make a connection to the Yahweh of the Old Testament and realize like, oh, we have continuity. This is Yahweh. This is not some other God that we're worshiping. We're not being deceived. This is Yahweh. You can trust that. That's the whole point. When it says in Acts 4:12 that there's no other name under heaven, and of course a lot of people bring that verse up, it's not specific word or spelling or whatever. It's the reputation and relationship and trust in Christ that you have. There's no other way to be saved other than having a relationship with Jesus. It's not being able to pronounce Yahweh or Yeshua correctly. We're going to get pretty close today, especially with Yahweh. I think we can do that one, but Yeshua is a little trickier because it's a guttural sound. But the point is, that's not the point, to pronounce Yeshua perfectly. It is to trust in the name of Jesus. It is to trust in Jesus as your Savior. That's the gospel. And of course, these people reject the gospel, which really is to their discredit. Compare this to sacred name camps, Hebrew roots, Torah keepers, who are pronunciation fanatics and who argue about this stuff all the time. And of course, they deny the gospel in the process, which should tell you everything. Proclaiming God's name is not about the pronunciation. It is about proclaiming the joy, the grace, the love of God to the world through, of course, the gospel. That is the fulfillment. It is the character, the authority, the reputation of God being proclaimed throughout the earth. And of course, there's a lot of verses in the Old Testament and the New Testament that talk about this and use the name as a figurative thing. Deuteronomy 28, verses 58 through 59. If you are not careful to do all the words of this law that are written in this book, that you may fear this glorious and awesome name, Yahweh your God, then Yahweh will bring upon you and your offspring extraordinary afflictions severe and lasting, and sickness grievous and lasting. So are you supposed to fear the pronunciation of God? No, because he wants you to pronounce the name. When you're blessing people, people would pronounce the sacred name. So that doesn't make sense. Well, what are you supposed to know? You're supposed to fear that God is the judge of the earth. If you don't fear that glorious and awesome name as the creator that you're subject to, then yeah, you're going to get all these punishments and afflictions and sicknesses because you're breaking covenant. Psalm 9, verse 10. And those who know your name, but put their trust in you. For you, O Yahweh, have not forsaken those who seek you. Now, of course, this is not talking about those who literally know how to spell your name or pronounce it, but rather those who know you. And of course, there is something to be said there about not being afraid to say God's name because he wants you to say it, obviously in a good context. But there is more to the story. It's not, this psalm is not saying for those who know how to spell your name, then they're saved. No, it's for those who trust in God. Which God? Well, the only God, Yahweh. That's the God that is revealed in the Bible, and there's no other God besides him. Isaiah 48, 9 through 11. For my name's sake, I defer my anger. For the sake of my praise, I restrain it for you, that I may not cut you off. Behold, I have refined you, but not as silver. I have tried you in the furnace of affliction. For my own sake, I do it. For how should my name be profaned? My glory I will not give to another. What is this about? Well, it's about a profound statement, which is that God and his plan of salvation is for God. And again, the Old Testament is consistent with the New Testament here. God, for his name's sake, is forgiving them. Otherwise, what would happen? People would say, look, the people that God chose to give, they were so annoying, not even he could deal with them. Well, I guess he can save up to a point. He's not really the savior of mankind. Do you see the problem? This is the blasphemy of God's name, or his name being profaned among the Gentiles. That for his name's sake, he defers his anger and forgives so that his name as a savior isn't profaned. And people say, see, God can't really save anybody. At some point, he just gets really angry and he just can't take it anymore. And of course, God got angry in the Old Testament, and God is going to judge the wicked at the end. So there's still wrath that needs to be poured out. Nevertheless, God endures the wicked, is what the Bible tells you in the Old Testament and also the New Testament. God endures the wicked, and for the sake of his name, he defers his anger. Do you understand how important this critical verse in Isaiah is? You need to commit this one to memory and understand it and what it means. Because what that means is that God is the one responsible for the result of your salvation. If you could lose your salvation, what does that mean? It means that God is not capable as a savior to keep you saved. Sure, he offered you the opportunity, which is nice, but he couldn't keep you saved. Your free will was just too much. You were just too rambunctious, and not even God could keep you saved. What does that say about God's name as a savior to people who aren't saved? Well, gosh, he can't keep those people saved. Why would I trust in God if he can't keep those people saved? This is how God's name, reputation, character is profaned. So, Arminianism, free will theology, even though people think that they're doing God a good by defending God, oh no, God just wants you to have free will, he's just a loving God. No, God is loving because he doesn't let you have your choice over the outcome of salvation. If you're dead, let's put it that way, it's more accurate description. If you're dead and God lets you there and you can't really choose a way out because you're dead, that's not the loving thing to do. If you're drowning and you're incapable of saving yourself and God says, okay, well, it's your choice, that's not loving. What is loving is God condescending into reality and rescuing you from being a dead corpse for the sake of his name, so that he might receive praise forever as the one who is sovereign and who keeps everybody that he's chosen to save saved. That is what this verse tells you. It is a profoundly important verse that reveals to you the gospel in the Old Testament. And of course, people who think of the Old Testament as legalism do not understand the Old Testament, because this is not legalism. This is God doing the work on your behalf for his glory, which is what, of course, is the message of the New Testament, which is much more clear, revealed in Christ. These are shadows, but it's the same message throughout the Bible. Very important. Ezekiel 36, verse 32. It is not for your sake that I will act, declares the Lord God. Let that be known to you. Be ashamed and confounded for your ways, O house of Israel. So why is he acting? It is for the sake of his name that he's acting, which is repeated in all these prophets. I'm not acting for your sake. There's nothing good about you. I'm acting for my sake because I am the Savior. And if I'm the Savior, I will save. That is God's name that is behind. But again, this is not literally his name, even though Yeshua is literally God saves, right? It is his reputation, his character, who he is. He's the Savior. Malachi 1, verse 11. For from the rising of the sun to its setting, my name will be great among the nations. And in every place incense will be offered to my name and a pure offering. For my name will be great among the nations, says Yahweh of hosts. Now, does that mean that we're going to have giant billboards? Or does it mean spiritually great, renowned? People will know and celebrate the name of God. And they will know the name of God because the name of God is Jesus. The sacred name, Yahweh, was revealed so that Jesus, when Yeshua came, God saves, you'd understand that that is Yahweh made flesh. Moving on, a couple more here. Acts 5, New Testament, 41. Then they left the presence of the council, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer dishonor for the name. Were they being persecuted for using the sacred name? Maybe. I mean, they might be. But this is not about literal pronunciation. It's about being worthy to suffer honor for God's reputation, for being a Christian. Because why? They're rejoicing because that means that they're being conformed to the Spirit of God and to the image of Christ by the Spirit of God. And that means that they're elect. Suffering confirms your election. That's why they were rejoicing. And this is the paradox. This is the mystery of life, of this life at least. Suffering lets you know that you're the real deal, that you're not a counterfeit believer. Because counterfeit believers go the way of the wind. They either go, left or right. Either the cares of this world or, suffering and tribulation comes at them. The sun burns them up and, the birds come and eat them, eat the seeds. So the point is that they rejoiced because they were getting in touch with the fact that they're elect and being worthy to be counted among the elect. That's what this is telling you. But it's using the name. So the name is not being used literally here is the point. Acts 9, verse 11 through 16, of course. In Mac, it has these giant tooltip windows that are super annoying. Anyway, and the Lord said to him, "Rise and go to the street called Straight, and at the house of Judas look for a man of Tarsus named Saul, for behold, he is praying, and he has seen in a vision a man named Ananias come in and lay his hands on him, so that he might regain his sight. But Ananias answered, Lord, I have heard much from many about this man, how much evil he has done to your saints at Jerusalem. And here he has authority from the chief priest to bind all who call on your name. Now, are we talking about calling on Yahweh or Jesus or Yeshua, or what's going on here? Or identifying with Christ is the issue at hand. But the Lord said to him, Go, for he is a chosen instrument of mine to carry my name before the Gentiles and kings and the children of Israel. For I will show him how much he must suffer for the sake of my name. Again, is God speaking of literally his name? Which is interesting because maybe Paul did use the sacred name, which is interesting from those previous articles we looked at. But no, this is for the sake of, for his reputation, for the gospel, for the message of the gospel. So, people today are snared by legalism and things like verbal inspiration, obsession over pronunciations, idolizing certain letters and sounds and translations and whatever else. This is just the legalistic Antichrist spirit, folks, designed to take you away from the gospel of grace and the intimate fellowship that you have through Christ and through faith that is available to anybody in any tribe, any tongue. That's what this is designed to do. It's designed to take you off of that path. The name, or in the name of God, is the authority of the character, the reputation, the identity of. Most of the time, it's not referring to the exact pronunciation, but rather it's figurative. Meaning, when you see all these figurative uses, you realize that this whole sacred name thing is not substantiated by Scripture whatsoever, because it's legalism. Now, with all that context out of the way, we can start to really do a deep dive into pronunciation and the various, interpretations on the sacred name, how it's pronounced. And of course, the first is going to be refuting the KJV version, which is Jehovah. So onward to part 4, pronunciation breakdown. Okay, so now that we have all of this context, It's time to go deeper and deeper into the nitty-gritty. We're going to start with Jehovah and why it's wrong. Of course, the KJV uses Jehovah in certain situations. Let's pull this up here. Where are you? There we go. This is from Got Questions. Is Jehovah the true name of God? In the Hebrew scriptures, the name of God is recorded as Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, so where did the name Jehovah come from? Good question. Ancient Hebrew did not use vowels in its written form. The vowels were pronounced in Hebrew, spoken in Hebrew, but were not recorded in written Hebrew. The appropriate vowel sounds of words were passed down orally. As a result, when ancient Hebrew is studied, scholars and linguists often do not know with absolute confidence how certain Hebrew words were pronounced. This is also a very important point. We will reiterate this again, and I said this in my Masoretic episode, I believe, that the pronunciations, when you go to the Hebrew interlinear, Hebrew in quotation marks, what you're reading is Masoretic pronunciation, meaning we don't know how these words were actually pronounced by David or Solomon specifically. Maybe some words like hallelujah, that one's easy, but not all words. You're relying on the Masoretes and the Pharisees to tell you how to pronounce words, which, of course, there's plenty of things wrong with that. We looked at in my Masoretic episode with the pronunciation that they came up with the Masoretic little dots and squiggles and Kabbalistic tools that they came up to basically make Hebrew, quote-unquote Hebrew, into a magical alphabet. Moving on, this particularly becomes an issue when studying the Hebrew name of God, written in the Hebrew scriptures as YHWH, also known as the Tetragrammaton. Despite much study and debate, it is still not universally agreed upon how the Hebrew name of God, Yahweh, was pronounced. Some prefer Yahweh, others prefer Yehovah, Yahuwah, or Yahweh. Still others argue for Jehovah. The KJV onlyists do. As you can see, virtually everything is up for debate. Should Yahweh be pronounced with 3 syllables or 2? Should the vowels be borrowed from Elohim or Adonai? Should the W be pronounced with more of a W sound or more of a V sound? Like Jehovah or Yehovah or Yahuwah. Which one is it? It is not the purpose of this article to settle the debate. Rather, it is the purpose of this article to discuss the use of Jehovah. The vast majority of Jewish and Christian biblical scholars and linguists do not believe Jehovah to be the proper pronunciation of Yahweh. There was no true J sound in ancient Hebrew. Even the Hebrew letter Vav, which is transliterated as W in YHWH, is said to have originally had a pronunciation closer to W than V of Jehovah. Remember when we were talking about how there's Haya and Hawa, and how if it was Haya, it was probably maybe transliterated by the Jews because you could substitute Y and W together. There's a lot of things that changed over the last 2,500 years, 3,000 years worth of history when we talk about languages and pronunciation and so on. Jehovah is essentially a Germanic pronunciation of the Latinized transliteration of the Hebrew YHWH. It is the letters of the Tetragrammaton Latinized into JHVH with vowels inserted. Yahweh or Yehovah is far more likely to be the correct pronunciation. The form, but wait a minute, if you believe in the KJV only and the KJV is this inspired thing and the words are perfect, we can't change them because God preserved his word through the 1611 KJV, then that's not true because God's name isn't Jehovah. There was no J sound in Hebrew. So there you go, another strike for the KJV onlyists. The form Jehovah, though, is very commonly used. Please don't use Jehovah. It just reminds me of Jehovah's Witnesses. It is used in the King James Version of the Bible, yada yada, in different places. It is also used and strenuously promoted by the Jehovah's Witnesses. Speaking of which, the Jehovah's Witnesses emphasize the use of Jehovah to the extent that any other name or title for God is viewed as borderline idolatry or outright heresy. Does that remind you of anything that we've been talking about? Do you remember how the Church of God and Seventh-day Adventism and Jehovah's Witnesses and all of these little mushroom denominations are all related in the same spirit and the same vein of history, how they all kind of proliferate from one source, which is the legalistic spirit of the 1800s? With all that said, it is not crucial to the Christian faith for the proper pronunciation of Yahweh to be known. Both the Old and New Testaments, inspired by God, use generic terms for God and Lord, including El, Elohim, Adonai, and Theos and Kurios in Greek. Yeah, the Greek uses Theos, God, and Kurios, Lord. If the authors of Scripture, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, were allowed to use these terms, it is not wrong for us to defer to him as God or Lord either. True, because when you are thinking of God and saying God or Lord, it is the heart that God looks at, and God knows that you're thinking of him. So there's no point in being legalistic, but it is important to know some things about this. In conclusion, namely that it's not Jehovah. In conclusion, it is highly unlikely that Jehovah is the correct pronunciation of Yahweh. Furthermore, it is far more important to know God through faith in Jesus Christ than it is to know the correct pronunciation of his name in Hebrew. I agree, Got Questions, and I wish you weren't dispensationalists, because you have some good articles sometimes. But as usual, eat the meat, spit out the bones. So, there's another one here from Wikipedia. This is Jehovah. Jehovah is the Latinized of the Hebrew Yehovah, which this is the rabbinic Hebrew. Yehovah is the rabbinic rendition of God's name, which is not true. The KJV only crowd needs to realize that the translators, just like they went with the Masoretic text, because they thought, oh, the Jews must have all the answers for the Old Testament, which doesn't make any sense considering the KJV people are all about the Greek manuscripts when it comes to the New Testament. But for some reason, they reject the Greek manuscripts of the Old Testament, which were written by Jews before Jesus. And they accept the quote-unquote Hebrew manuscripts written by Jews after Jesus, which are very corrupt and have every interest in them to hide Jesus from the scriptures. They went with tradition. And another thing they went with is by taking the rabbinic name, Yehovah, and just Latinizing it into Jehovah, which is, it's nothing. It's not the true name of God. In fact, it's actually an inversion, which you'll learn today. Where are we at? One, vocalization of the Tetragrammaton, the proper name of God in Israel in the Old Testament. The Tetragrammaton is considered one of the 7 names of God in Judaism and a form of God's name in Christianity. The consensus among scholars is that the historical vocalization of Tetragrammaton at the time of the redaction of the Torah, which is the 6th century of BC, is most likely Yahweh. The historical vocalization was lost because in the Second Temple Judaism during 3rd to 2nd centuries BC, the pronunciation of the Tetragrammaton came to be avoided being substituted with Adonai, which we know now why, which these things will not tell you. You have to dig a little deeper. The Hebrew vowel points to Adonai were added to the Tetragrammaton by the Masoretes, and the resulting form was transliterated around the 12th century CE as Yehovah or Yehovah. The derivative forms of Yahuwah and Jehovah first appeared in the 16th century. So that's where you get the word Jehovah from. It's a rabbinic tradition that the translators of the KJV followed instead of having better scholarship. But hey, you know what? We can't really blame them. They didn't have the internet at the time. They did what they thought was best, and they made a big mistake. That's all. William Tyndale first introduced the vocalization of the Tetragrammaton Jehovah in his translation of Exodus 6:3, and appears in some other early English translations, including the Geneva Bible and the King James Version. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops states that to pronounce the Tetragrammaton, it is necessary to introduce vowels that alter the written and spoken forms of the name, i.e. Yahweh or Jehovah. Jehovah appears in the Old Testament of some widely used translations, including the American Standard Version, Young's Literal Translation, which is a good translation for some things. The New World Translation, which I think is the Jehovah's Witnesses, and uses Jehovah in both the Old and New Testaments. Jehovah does not appear in most mainstream English translations, some of which use Yahweh, but most continue to use Lord or Lord in capitalized to represent the Tetragrammaton. This is the name of Yehovah at a Lutheran church in Norway, which has some strange Illuminati kind of symbolism in it. Who knows? But anyway, I think that's all I had from the Tetragrammaton. Let me just double check. I don't think I did. I think that was it. Yeah, basically we want to know that Jehovah comes from the rabbinic tradition, and of course the KJV translators, because they follow the rabbinic tradition with the Masoretic text, they also followed in the tradition of God's name, which is wrong. But anyway, Jehovah is a transliteration of a rabbinic rendition, which is Yehovah or Yehovah, depending on how you pronounce the Vav. KJV aligned with the rabbis. And again, see my Masoretic video if that insults you. I'm not looking to insult anybody. The KJV is a good translation. It's good. It's useful. It's not a perfect rendering of the Bible. Nothing is. The Bible is the Bible. Translations are translations. The KJV also aligned with rabbis to translate it. Yeah, I already said that part. You will learn that the rabbinic version is an inversion. It's backwards. And you'll see what I mean by that as we go along, which is interesting because, Satan does everything backwards. He inverts everything. We know that these Hollywood people, when they do their music videos, they play them backwards. You get some special, message and so on. These types of satanic things. So it's very interesting to me that the rabbinic Antichrist Jews have the pronunciation backwards, and they make it the secret that you have to find, whereas God is the other way around, and he's open. He's said nothing in secret. Now, while we're on this topic of Jehovah, it is important to address both sides of the issue. So yes, Jehovah is not the name of God. It's not. However, there are some people that have argued that Hova in Hebrew means destruction, which it does to some degree, disaster. And this is proof that either Yahweh, so they go in different directions with this depending on how deceived they are, but they either say Yahweh as a being is an evil deity in the Old Testament. So there you go. See, Jehovah is actually destruction. So that comes from Yehovah, which means the one who destroys, because it's got the prefix on Hova. Hova, Yehovah, meaning he's the one who destroys, that kind of thing. The destroyer. Or they go the direction of, that's a rabbinic conspiracy. So they don't say necessarily that Yahweh is an evil God, but they say, Yehovah or Jehovah, that's a false god. That's a rabbinic conspiracy. They're worshiping their false god by saying Jehovah and Yehovah. Well, we have to be very studious about this. And let me see if I can zoom this out. There's this nice article that I want to show you, because you'll learn that, yes, Jehovah is not God's name. It's not accurate. Neither is Yehovah, the rabbinic tradition. But the people who are arguing that Hova is destruction, and therefore one of the two options that I gave you, either, there you go, the Old Testament God is evil, or Yehovah is a rabbinic conspiracy to worship their false god because he's the god of destruction. Like, that's not tenable with actual Hebrew. We're going to read an article. It's going to highlight this guy named Nehemiah Gordon, which we'll talk about a little bit later, because he's kind of the main figure in promoting this Yehovah pronunciation and sticking to the rabbinic tradition. We're going to unpack his arguments. But he's a scholar. You have to eat the meat, spit out the bones. I have another scholar pegged for a video we're going to watch. He's a critical scholar. I don't think he's anything, but he's a scholar. He has some important things to say about, like, the Paleo-Hebrew and how it was a language. We'll look at that later. But the point is this: eat the meat, spit out the spit out. I was going to say spit out the points. Don't spit out the points. Eat the points. Swallow them down. Spit out the bones. You have to eat the meat, spit out the bones. This is going to be an article on, does Hova really mean a ruin or disaster? And the point is, Hebrew scholar Nehemiah Gordon, who holds a master's degree in biblical studies from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and a bachelor's degree in archaeology, says the following: the rather silly claim that Yehovah comes from the Hebrew word hova, meaning disaster. As I have explained in the past, this would be like saying that the word assume comes from the English words ask, you, and me. I call this hova logic, which is defined as knowing just enough Hebrew to be a disaster to yourself and others. And this is the point, folks. When we're using concordances and stuff, we really have to study. We have to study and double check everything. You don't have to be a Hebrew scholar. You don't have to speak the language fluently, but you do have to have good principles of interpretation. So make sure you watch my Berean video. In reality, Yehovah comes from the root word haya, meaning to be, which we read about, whereas the word hova, disaster, comes from the root word hava, which is HVH. The two words only sound similar to someone blissfully ignorant of Hebrew grammar. For those who actually know Hebrew, hove is a perfectly normal word meaning he is, and Chovah is the feminine form meaning she is, both from Haya. Yehovah comes from the Hove Chovah, he is, that is, she is. Neither has anything to do with the word Hova meaning disaster from HVH. So they're different root words, but they're homonyms, meaning that they sound the same, but they don't mean the same thing. My Laotian friend provides another example from Hebrew of how disastrous Hova logic can be. The Hebrew word for elephant, pil, sounds similar to pilagesh, meaning concubine. Using Hova logic, you could come up with some bizarre explanations. You might break down the word pilagesh into two words, pil, elephant, and the verb gesh, meaning approach. You could then say that ancient concubines were immensely fat and their paramours would shout at them, pil, gesh, approach, elephant. As silly as this sounds, it's actually more plausible than the name Yehovah meaning anything to do with the word disaster. Also, this question almost invariably comes from people who either don't know Hebrew or know just enough to be dangerous to themselves. I'm not putting these people down. I applaud them for trying to understand Hebrew the best they can with the limited tools available to them. This is just me venting my frustration at having to explain basic Hebrew grammatical concepts. The question starts off with the observation that Hebrew word hova means disaster, calamity. This word appears 3 times in the Tanakh, once in Isaiah and twice in a single verse in Ezekiel, where Ezekiel 7 verse 26, evil is coming upon you, which you will not know how to charm away. Disaster, hova, is falling upon you, which you will not be able to appease. Isaiah 47:11 says, calamity, hova, shall follow calamity, hova, and rumor shall follow rumor, etc. Since hova means disaster or calamity, the question goes, doesn't this mean that Yehovah also means disaster or calamity? I guess this makes sense to those innocent of basic Hebrew grammar, but in the Hebrew language this makes no sense. This would be like saying that the English word assume is derived from the words ass, because when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. Someone actually told me this many years ago, and they were dead serious. Of course, an examination of any historical English dictionary will reveal that assume actually comes from the Latin verb assumere, and not from the English word for a donkey. Let's look at some Hebrew basics before we get ourselves into trouble assuming. With a few exceptions, every word in the Hebrew language has a 3-letter root, something proven in the 11th century by the Spanish rabbi Yonah ibn Yana. Modern linguistics has confirmed this, observing that the 3-letter root is a basic characteristic of all Semitic languages. Most Hebrew roots are whole roots, meaning all 3 letters of the root are present, regardless of how the root is used in different grammatical forms. For example, the Hebrew root shmr, shin, whatever the other letters are, has the basic meaning to guard. Hebrew can use this root in dozens of ways, each with a different shade of meaning, such as the verbs shamarti, I guarded, and hishamer, be careful, be on guard, the noun mishmeret, meaning duty, which a person has to be on guard to keep, and the names shemer and shomron as a whole root. The letters shin, mem, resh are always present in words derived from this root. The opposite of a whole root is a hollow root. In hollow roots, 1 or more of the 3 letters of the root can be absent in certain grammatical forms. For example, the root bnh, to build, loses the third letter of the root in the verb baniti, spelled bnyty in English. I built. In this form of the verb, the h of the bnh drops and is replaced by a yod. If you didn't know about hollow verbs and saw the word baniti, you might think the root was bny, when in fact it is bnh. So there's certain grammatical rules, that you don't have to memorize all these, but just understand where this is going, that you can't argue the way some people are arguing against Jehovah. Jehovah is not the name of God, and I will prove to you that Yehovah isn't either. These rabbinic traditions are wrong. However, you have to understand both sides. You're probably thinking, when is he going to talk about the name? Okay, here goes. The name Yehovah derives from the 3-letter root hyh, haya, which means to be. We know this from Exodus 3:14, in which the Almighty explains his name, Eyeh Asher Eyeh. The word Eyeh is an imperfect verb from the root haya, meaning to be, which we read about in Wikipedia. In later Hebrew, the imperfect form took took on the meaning of future, but in biblical Hebrew, it primarily expressed a repetitive action. In plain English, Ehyeh means I am now and I will continue to be in the future. This is why Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh can be translated as I am that which I am, but also as I will be that which will be. So again, God's name is this profound reflection of self-existence in a couple of short words. Both of these translations would be I am now and will continue to be in the future that which I am now and will continue to be in the future. That's quite a mouthful, and you can see why most translations prefer to dumb it down. The word Ehyeh has all three letters of the root Hayah, which may lead you to conclude that Hayah is the whole root. However, in other forms of the verb, the second and third letter drop, which means it is a hollow root. For example, Hayiti, spelled Hyyyty, I was, is missing the third letter of the root H, and in its place has a yud instead. So instead of Hayah, it's Hayyiti, like it's an extra yud. On the other hand, the masculine singular imperative heve, pronounced heve, be, is missing the second. This is actually really important. So you see H-E-V-H, how we read in English, E-H. In Hebrew, they have a diphthong, meaning that it's it goes from one vowel to another. It's a longer vowel. It's not heve, it's heve. So keep that in mind with the EH, very important. But anyway, this means B is missing the second letter of the root and its place has a vav. This last piece of information is crucial because it means in certain forms the root looks like hava, even though it in fact is hayah. This can be confusing because there is an unrelated root which really is hava and which has an entirely different meaning from hayah. Don't worry, I'm almost done with the crash course in Hebrew grammar. Now back to the name. Yehovah comes from the same root as Ehyeh, the root hayah. Yehovah is actually a combination of three verb forms. Hayah, he was; Hoveh, he is; and Yihyeh, he is now and will continue to be in the future. Together, Hayah, Hoveh, and Yihyeh combine into the name Yehovah. But does the meaning of the name tell us its pronunciation? Not necessarily. Many ancient Hebrew names stray from the vowel patterns found in common nouns and verbs. This is also important for a later thing with Yeshua. For example, my name, Nehemiah, pronounced Nehemiah, means Yah comforts. However, if I said Yah comforts in a regular biblical Hebrew sentence, it would be Nichaim Yah. Why is my name pronounced Nichem Yah and not Nichaim Yah? As we say in Hebrew, kacha, just because. Hebrew names don't, of course, and you're talking to Hebrew, 2,000 plus years of rabbinic Hebrew, so Hebrew doesn't follow the same rules as common nouns and verbs. Deal with it. The bottom line is the meaning of Yehovah or YHVH is that he was, that he is, and he will be. That's the point, which is what I said too. Doesn't tell us how to pronounce the name. The pronunciation Yehovah is based on Hebrew Masoretic scripts. There you go. That's all you need to know. But for that, you'll have to read Keith's little study. Let's get back to the hollow verbs. We say that Yehovah comes from the hollow root hayah, and as a result, the Y can be replaced with V in certain forms. This is discussed in that Wikipedia article too. That's why it's a hollow root. To the untrained eye, this makes it look like the root HVH, when in fact it is HYH. Even though it's in certain circumstances it's being replaced, it doesn't mean that the root word is HVH, Hova, to destroy. That's the issue being underlined here, because Hayah and Hoveh, the Yod and the Vav can be. You'll learn about this when we talk about matris lecciones, which are certain letters and consonants that can act as vowels. Yod and Vav can be kind of interchangeable, and so what he's saying is when these interchange because of certain grammatical pronunciations or even pronunciation traditions, of course now with the Masoretic text, it doesn't mean that the root word is actually Hova. Does that make sense? You're dealing with Hayah, which is to be. The Y part is the Yod. But if you change that to a Vav, because they're kind of interchangeable, it would be hava, but that doesn't mean it's hove, even though it has the same consonants, same letters, HVH. Hopefully that's making sense, because that is the problem that's happening, where people are creating this argument and they're making themselves look foolish. Remember the word hova meaning disaster? That word actually comes from the root word HVH, which means destruction. There is no connection between the name Yehovah and the word hova, because they are from two unrelated Hebrew roots. Haya, Hyh, to be, and HVH, destruction, with the vav as the root word, not as like a switch of pronunciation. It's confusing a little bit for sure, but hopefully you're following it. Pronouncing the name as Yehovah doesn't change the situation. Even though Yehovah sounds like it contains the word hova, disaster, within it, this is a pure coincidence, just like the word assume, which sounds like it contains the word as in it. It doesn't mean that Yehovah means disaster, nor does it mean Yehovah is connected in any way to the word for disaster. If you assume that to be the case, then you're just making an ass of yourself. And I think there was some more stuff here. Here are two verses in English, then in Hebrew, that have hova, calamity, mischief, first, then the tetragrammaton, Jehovah, in the next verse, proving they are not the same or have the same meaning or in any way linked, except in these two verses when they are in the same chapter. So the point is, in Ezekiel 7, 26 to 27, I think this is the New World Translation because they use Jehovah, but it says, there will come adversity upon adversity, and there will occur report upon report. People will actually seek vision from a prophet, and the law itself will perish from a priest and counsel from elderly men. So this is hova, as in disaster, adversity, calamity. And at the end it says, they will have to know that I am the Lord, i.e. Yahweh. In this case, it's Jehovah. So these two words are different. They're translated differently because they're two completely different words, even though they're homonyms, meaning they sound, or I should say, even homographs and homonyms, because a homograph's spelled the same, but it doesn't mean the same. Homonym sounds the same, but it doesn't mean the same. So they're kind of both, really. KJV with Strong's lexical references. Yeah. We looked at that. Hebrew text. Same thing. So you see the Hebrew text is actually, of course, this is Masoretic Hebrew, but either way, it's different. So we can see clearly that Hebrew word transliterated into hova is used for words like calamity and mischief, but it isn't used or linked in any way to the tetragrammaton, thus to Jehovah. So why was that important? Well, in this debate with Jehovah and Yehovah, there is the side that says, well, you see, the rabbis worship the false god, the god of this world, the god of destruction, and so they changed his name to Jehovah. So they go, well, who knows? I'm not totally against that from everything I've learned, but the point is that it's not the best argument. Even if it is true, the only way you could argue it is through some esoteric way that it's like exoteric and esoteric, right? Like to the outside, they tell you, oh, no, it's not connected. And to the inside, they're actually having their own, private understanding of it. That's possible. I'm not willing to discount that. However, there's no way for you to prove that. There's no way for you to prove that unless you had some sort of admission by a rabbi or some sort of documentation. There's no way to prove that. So don't make the argument that hova is linked to Jehovah, because it's not. Because from a linguistic and grammatical context, it's not. It's completely two different root words. It's, from our perspective, because we don't have the same grammatical rules, it seems the same. And this is the problem. People read Strong's concordances. They see a pronunciation, they match, and say, oh, it's the same way. I will tell you of the same error that I committed. I'll happily admit that. In my Masoretic episode, I went for the low-hanging fruit. I needed some sugar, so I guess I wanted some low-hanging fruit. And I saw that the Septuagint did not change the translation of, I should say the Greek manuscripts said in some of these verses in the New Testament, Lord of Sabaoth. Lord of Sabaoth. And now that word Sabaoth isn't Sabbath. It's not related to Sabbath, even though, from my perspective as an English speaker, it's like this. It's like a homonym, meaning it sounds the same, but it's not the same word at all. Sabaoth is from the root word tsaba, T-S-A-B-A, I believe, which is hosts. It has to do with armies and Lord of hosts. So it was one of those things where I was like, oh, look, they were hiding Lord of the Sabbath because they're trying to hide Christ's identity, which of course is very well documented. And so it played into my expectations, and I made a mistake. And that's okay. I made a post. It made a little identification there. And the point is to show you that this thing happens very easily if you don't pay attention. So, especially because we're not Hebrew scholars, we're not Greek scholars, but you don't need to be a Hebrew scholar to learn the truth. And we're going to learn the truth today, because even Nehemiah, despite his education, he's wrong because he's blinded by the rabbinic tradition. Either way, don't use this argument to argue against the sacred name people, especially people who are like, Jewish or, very much into the Old Testament and studying Hebrew, because they can refute you very easily. And then you look foolish. And then the other things you need to say maybe won't be believed. Jehovah or Yehovah is not true. It's not the true name of God, but neither are these theories that Hova and Jehovah are related in some way. Meaning Jehovah is like the God of destruction or something. That's not true. It also gives you an overall example of how people commit error by using something like a concordance or looking at the original language just briefly, not doing enough of a word study, not reading commentaries, and forming an opinion very quickly, which of course leads to error. And of course, I've committed that error too. I'm not innocent. It happens, and it makes you a better student. And you realize, wow, my desire for something really baited me there. And that's how you learn. So the point is, you're going to make those mistakes. It's okay, but just be aware of good principles. So watch my Berean Fox video so you can learn what those principles are. Now, onward to Nehemiah Gordon. Nehemiah Gordon is a big figure in this whole discussion with the sacred name. He's published a lot of materials, a lot of papers, and supposedly he's proved that the name of God is actually Yehovah, and he's uncovering all of this. Oh my gosh, we've known about it for 2,000 years, and now we're going to proclaim it to the world because that's what the Torah says, and we have to proclaim God's name to the world. And of course, it's not the real name. It's the rabbinic name, and so that's very fishy to me. But anyway, he claims to be related to this long line of rabbis, which already should be a red flag for you if you've seen my Masoretic video. But these rabbis supposedly conspired to hide the pronunciation of God's name, which is true. We looked at other things that said that basically the rabbis decided to keep it secret. So he's revealing that to you, and he's saying he's related to this long line of rabbis, and so they basically wanted to conspire to keep it secret so it wouldn't get the wrong hands, whatever that means. And now he's revealing it to you because he grew up with all these things. There's basically some sort of 7-year ritual of transferring the name where they pass it down to a new generation of rabbis, where there's this elaborate bathing ritual and it's in a secluded place. It really, to me, just sounds like secret society stuff. It is initiation into the mysteries, the kind of thing. So anyway, you can do more research into that if you want. But if we pull up this article here from White Feather Ministries, and can I zoom in? Let's see. We can zoom in. Tanakh Foundation's concept on the name of God. We don't need to go to Gnostic, Christian, pagan, or Latin sources because the Jews had rabbis who knew the name. There is another source that confirms this, written in 1450 AD. It was written by a rabbi named Joseph ibn Sayak. He wrote a book that was never printed or copied. There is only one book, the one written by Ibn Sayak. In this book, he is answering a series of questions through letters. Question 43 says, a certain sage has been uttering the name according to its letters, and a certain rabbi rebuked him for this. But the sage was stubborn in his actions. That tells us that someone knew how to say the name openly, and others recognized it as being correct in the 15th century. Now, really quick pause break. What are we using to determine authority here? We're using rabbinic commentaries and rabbinic Judaism. If you know that rabbinic Judaism is Antichrist and it is a rebellion to the scriptures, is the Holy Spirit guiding any of this work? Absolutely not. So right away, our lens is foggy. So you should know that. But again, this is just to show you what they are promoting. Where was I? But scholars say the Jews didn't know the name, but that is not true. There are 16 rabbis who have said the name is Yehovah. These 16 rabbis are from all over the Jewish world, from Spain to Israel, Poland to Egypt. Some go back to 1300 and some to the 20th century. One is Obadiah Yosef, the chief Sephardic rabbi of Israel from 1973 to 83. In one of his books, he states that the name of God is Yehovah. When you search the same databases of Jewish writings, you will not find the name Yehovah. 100,000 books from Bar Ilan University. Now, if 16 rabbis say the name is Yehovah, and the tens of thousands of other rabbis don't, that means the name was intended to be a secret and never meant to know. We were never meant to know this. If you read 100,000 books, we would probably never know this. But thanks to computers and certain programs, these can be searched. One of these 16 rabbis is Menachem Tzion in the 14th century, and he said in a commentary on Genesis 3:15 that, quote, "This is my name forever." Exodus 3:15. There is also a secret here received by tradition in the words of "This is my name forever," Lo'olam. For they are the vowels of the great name. So again, remember, Jews are all about gematria and Kabbalah and secret numbers and messages in the Torah and so on and so forth. Is this a hint? Did God mean that when he spoke this to Moses? Well, God tells you that he didn't say anything in secret. Excuse me. So I don't think so. But anyway, Yehovah doesn't do anything by accident. And this rabbi in the 14th century is saying he knew the secret and it was passed on to him as a way to remember the name. The vowels of forever in Exodus 3:15, La'olam, were the vowels for the name of God. The Rabbi Tzion goes on to say it's a mnemonic. Who in the sky, Shachak, can measure up to you? Psalm 89, verse 6. A mnemonic is an acronym that helps us remember something. The mnemonic is the word Shashak for sky. Shashak is an acronym for the vowels Shiva, Cholam, and Kamatz, the vowels in Yehovah. In other words, if you take the first letters of the vowels markings, Shiva, Cholam, and Kamatz, it forms the acronym Shashak, sky. So this rabbi told us that it is the vowels of the Le'olam, forever, and it's the vowels represented by the word Shachak, Shiva, Cholam, Kamatz. Rabbi Tzion says that later that these are the words of the man who revealed the secret to him. Now, we don't know if he stood ankle deep in the water as in the ceremony we discussed earlier. Remember that thing I just told you about? This is what they're talking about, this little initiation ceremony type of thing. But he participated in the trail of transmission of the name. The devices that were taught to him will help remember how to say Yehovah. There is no way to get it wrong when you have the same vowels in Le'olam that are in God's name, Le'olam Yehovah. This is just one rabbi out of at least 16 that say the name is Yehovah. Now, by the way, Le'olam, this is Masoretic pronunciation. How do you know it's not La'olem? How do we know? Because again, we're basing it off of Masoretic pronunciation. The pronunciation of these other Hebrew words, like forever, they were lost in translation, folks. You need to understand that, again, some things like hallelujah are easy. That one probably didn't get lost because it's very common. But some of these other words, it could be E, it could be A, it could be U. We don't know. We really don't know. And you'll see an example of that in a video coming soon. Another rabbi is Rabbi Sofer, and he is considered the greatest grammarian of the 17th century. Rabbi Tzion was a mystic, but Sofer is a grammarian. Oh, they're all mystics, but anyway, he wrote a letter to Meir Macharam of Lublin, saying that when Yod He Vav He is read in the world to come, its vowels will be Shashak. Remember what we said previously in Psalm 89:6 and the word for sky. This tells us Yehovah is pronounced Yehovah and not Yahweh, Yahweh, Yehuah, or anything else. You'll see what it's actually pronounced. Those names have not been found. This is saying YHVH is pronounced with the Shiva, Cholam, and Kamatz. Vowel markings pronounced Yehovah. In a response to Rabbi Sofer in a letter, Meir Macharam of Lublin said, "Know, my beloved, how extremely difficult it is to put things like this in writing, and even more so a letter sent about from place to place concerning the vowels of the Tetragrammaton, which are Shiva, Cholam, Kamatz." He openly states it, and he isn't even disputing this fact. He doesn't know who will read this letter, so it's hard to say this, but you say the name of God is Yehovah, that's what he is saying. He goes on to say, I found in the words of my grandfather, our teacher, Rabbi Asher, head of the Beit Din of Krakow, he wrote a holy book called Emek HaBraka, but because of its immense holiness, it was never printed. That it not be used by those who are not worthy. This is the same kind of legalist spirit with the KJV too. I mean, it's just this obsession over physical things. This is what it says in chapter 34. Concerning the Tetragrammaton, its vowels received from Sinai are Shiva Cholam Kamatz. So supposedly this really holy book that never got published tells you the truth. There is no room for Yahweh, Yahweh, or anything else according to these men. Yeah, but are these men to be trusted is the question. The book Emek HaBracha was never printed, and we only have the quotes from the author's grandson. Meyer Macharam of Lublin ends his letter by saying, I have one request, that you hide this letter in a pure and holy place and not allow it to be passed around here and there. When he died in 1616, his Talmidim printed the letter, and that is how we have it today. We were never meant to see this letter. It was to remain a secret. Gosh, you see, by happenstance, and just, we were just lucky we got this letter, and this long line of secrecy from the rabbis is finally revealed. It just seems really sketchy to me, especially everything that's going on with the Third Temple and so on and so forth. Anyway, we'll see how that all pans out. But there is a rabbi named Rabbi Jacob Bachrach in 1896 who wrote, if the vowels in the Tetragrammaton were indeed the vowels of Adonai, precision would have required putting a shataf patach under the yod for the aleph of Adonai. The vowels of yod he vav he are not the vowels of Adonai, and this rabbi says that the teaching is nonsense. He continues, according to the rulings that have come down to us, there is no prohibition from the Torah to speak the name the way it is written. However, the custom not to pronounce the name, see, they admit it at least, the custom to not pronounce the name the way it is written is very old. Thus, it is not right to pronounce the name, but there is no prohibition from the Torah. So which one is it? Do you respect the tradition of the elders, or do you respect the Torah, which is God's word? So there you go. Who God wants you to know his name. There was a time, and there shall again be a time when all peoples of all them will call on the name of Yahweh, and Yahweh will be one and his name one. For this tradition of reading what is not written, i.e. Adonai, will be completely abolished, and then we will all read it the way it is written, Yehovah. So this is, again, to me, a sign that this is being revealed right now. Especially, again, imagine if this Nehemiah Gordon guy is from a long line of rabbis, and rabbis are practically their own secret society, and he's revealing it to you now, revealing to you. And of course, this is right in line with the Middle East spicing up and the Third Temple narrative and all the things that we've discussed in other videos. It's very interesting timing, don't you think? I think it's very interesting and uncanny timing. So, what do we take from that? Well, we can take quite a lot of things. But the rabbinic tradition claims a particular pronunciation, which is Yehovah. The claim is based on rabbinic writings, oral tradition, and of course, secrecy. But God wanted his name to be known from the very beginning, of course, when he proclaimed it to Moses. So secrecy is not God's way of doing things. If we read Isaiah 46 or 48:16, it says, draw near to me, hear this. From the beginning I have not spoken in secret. From the time it came to be, I have been there. And now the Lord God has sent me in his spirit. In John 18, verse 20, Jesus says the same thing, because he's Yahweh. Jesus answered him, I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in the synagogues and the temple, where all Jews came together. I have said nothing in secret. Now, if you know that Jesus is Yahweh, and in both testaments, Yahweh is speaking to you, and he's saying, I have said nothing in secret, and you have a group of people who reject Yahweh, really, and they're telling you, we have this secret thing that we're now revealing to you, are you really going to trust their testimony? I don't think so. We also know the Jews, after Jesus, had an incentive to corrupt the scriptures. They rebelled against God very clearly. In fact, God in the Talmud, it records 40 years after the crucifixion of Christ, from 31 AD to 70 AD, where God literally gave them supernatural signs on the Day of Atonement, where the things that they were relying on, like the red ribbon turning white and all these supernatural things that would usually happen, none of those went through. God is literally telling them 40 years in a row, you're not forgiven. You're not forgiven. Stop sacrificing. You're not forgiven. Meanwhile, there's the gospel being proclaimed around them. Hey, forgiveness of sins, Jesus Christ. You have these two messages. Couldn't be any clearer. And they stubbornly refused. 40 years, that's it, you're getting judged. Boom. Destruction. So the gospel, or the Talmud records this. And what does that mean? That means that these people who are Pharisees and rabbis are solidified in their rebellion to Yahweh, just like all the rebellious Israelites in history, from Korah's rebellion to the apostate Israelites like Manasseh and Ahab and so on and so forth. So you have nothing new under the sun. The God of Judaism is not the God of the Bible for many reasons. We break those down in the Why the Jews Are Not God's Chosen People video. Check it out. So you understand the difference between Judaism and the Old Testament. Two completely different things. Even though they will claim like this continuity, unbroken continuity to Abraham, which is what the Pharisees claim too, so nothing new under the sun. So the question all this is, can we trust rabbinic tradition? The answer, of course, is no, we can't. Can we trust somebody who claims to be from the tradition of secrecy and rabbis who hate Christians, who hate pretty much anybody that's not Jewish, and now suddenly this person is revealing to you this truth, initiating you into the mystery kind of thing? I don't know. I'm very skeptical. Now, the letter Vav is kind of a tricky one because it's the third letter. So you have Yod He Vav He. That's the W or the V. And this third letter, the debate in pronunciation is whether it's pronounced with more of a W sound, like Yahuwah, or Yahweh, or Yehuwah, or it's pronounced with a V sound, like Yehovah, or Yahuwah, or whatever other variation, but as long as the W is a V, if that makes sense. So these letters can work more as a W or V sound, depending on the pronunciation. They're substituting with each other. And they can create different results. So it can be Yahuwah, Yehovah, Yahovah. There's a lot of different vowel possibilities if you don't have context. Now, I want to watch a video really quick on this exact issue because this guy brings it up, and I think we start at 2 minutes. Let's go from 2 minutes.
In the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest biblical
Oh, this was already playing. Okay, let's watch it.
text that we have in existence, the name is written with just 4 letters. When the Masoretes invented the
This is Dead Sea Scrolls he's talking about.
Nikodot, a system of dots and dashes to represent vowel sounds, we find that the name was written with different vowels, providing different pronunciations for the name. Here are a few of the more common ones. In Genesis 2 verse 4, the name is written with these vowels and is one of the more common forms of this name in the Masoretic text. But without going into any details here, these vowels do not follow the standard rules for vowels, making a pronunciation difficult. But it could be transliterated as Yeh-va. In Ezekiel 7 verse 3, the name is written with these vowels. But again, they do not follow the standard rules for vowels, but could be transliterated as Yeh-vi. Another form of this name is found in Genesis 3:14, where it is written with these vowels, which provide the pronunciation Yehovah. This vowel pointing provides the vowel, this one the vowel, and this dot, which is called the cholam, represents the O sound.
Remember that rabbinic tradition where they're like, oh, it's this little mnemonic hidden in the particular word that they picked out forever, cholam, katz, or whatever the 3 letters were. It's all just rabbinic mysticism. And the Masoretes created the pronunciation guides, and so they inserted this pronunciation. This is not part of the original Hebrew, because original Hebrew wasn't Masoretic Hebrew.
In the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were written long before the invention of these vowel pointings, Hebrew words are often spelled differently than they are in the Masoretic text. Let's use the word Elohim as an example. Here is how this word appears in the Masoretic text. This dot is the cholam, where we get the O vowel in Elohim, and is no different from the cholam that we find in Yehovah. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, we sometimes see this word written the same as the Masoretic text, but without the vowel pointings, of course, such as this word, that we find in Genesis 1 verse 5. However, in many of the Dead Sea Scrolls, we find the word Elohim written in this way, such as we see in this scroll from Psalms 138. The letter Vav appears in this word and represents the O vowel. But when the Masoretic text was written, the Vav was dropped and replaced with the Cholam, the dot. We see the same dropping of the Vav from ancient texts and being replaced with the Cholam in many words. Here is the word Jacob, Yaakov, as it appears in the Masoretic Hebrew text. Note the red dot, which is the Cholam representing the O sound. But in the Dead Sea Scrolls, this name is written in this way, with the letter Vav to represent the O sound. Here on the left is the Hebrew word kol, which means all, from the Masoretic Hebrew text. And here it is from the Dead Sea Scrolls. And here is the word lo, which means no, from the Masoretic Hebrew text. And here it is from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Let's take another look at the name Yahweh as it appears in the Masoretic text, where it is pronounced Yehovah. If words written with the Cholam in the Masoretic text are frequently written with the Vav instead in the Dead Sea Scrolls, then we should expect to see this name written in this way in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
So now working backwards, right? We know that change was happening in the language. We should expect to see God's name written like this if this is the pronunciation.
The first Vav represents the O sound, and the second Vav represents the V sound. But nowhere in any of the Dead Sea Scrolls do we find...
Really quick, because Vav, again, is one of those letters, matris lectionis, which can also double as a vowel. Vav. So if they're both together, then that indicates that there's a vowel and a consonant. Ov. So that would be the way it should be written in older texts, because this is how things were written. Because again, the Vav can double as a vowel or as a consonant. And if you're trying to make the word Ov, or the sound Ov, like Yaakov, like we looked in other places, then you would write two Vavs in a row. But we don't see this in older texts.
Find this spelling for the name. So where did the O vowel come from in Yehovah? It is not there. When I presented this evidence to Nehemiah Gordon, he pointed out that this is an interesting suggestion. And then he showed me 3 Hebrew words in the Masoretic text that have the Cholam Vav, just like in the name Yehovah. But in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they are not written with a double Vav. The first example he provided is the word ka-loveh, which can be found in Isaiah 24 verse 2. But in the Dead Sea Scrolls, this word is written with only one Vav. The second is the word kovai from Isaiah 49:23. But in the Dead Sea Scrolls, this word is written with only one Vav.
So really quick, Nehemiah Gordon is responding to this claim saying, oh, well, there's other words that are not following that pronunciation, meaning they only have one Vav. You're going to see that there's something more to the story. Even though he seems to refute this position, there's more to the story.
The third word is the word kovecha from Psalms 69 verse 7. But again, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, this is written with only one Vav. But are we sure that the Masoretic pronunciation with the Cholam was indeed pronounced the same way in the time of the Dead Sea Scrolls? Was this word originally pronounced kovecha, or was it originally kavecha without the O vowel?
You see the point? The Vav being just a Vav, if they wanted the sound Ov back before all these Masoretes basically invented their dots and squiggles and all these pronunciation things, If they wanted the sound of, then they would have written 2 vavs. Nehemiah is saying, oh, well, there's other words that are pronounced of, and they just have 1 vav. Well, how do you know they're pronounced of? It could be kaveka, because a vav could be a vowel or a consonant. The point is, you don't know what it was pronounced when it was just 1. You're assuming it was of, but that's a Masoret. You're projecting. It's like saying, like using a proleptic calendar and saying, oh, well, Jesus was crucified on a Tuesday, actually, because, if we count back, well, you can't do that. Before 321 AD, you can't use a system that's created and try to proleptically use it backwards. This is what Nehemiah is doing. You say, oh, well, it's of because they had 1 vav. Well, how do you know? There's no record that people pronounced of with just 1 vav. There's only records that if there was 2 vavs in a row, that then it would be obvious the pronunciation is intended to be of. This one has 1 vav, and so it could be kaveka, and that's what the rebuttal to his rebuttal is, which is that you don't really know what the pronunciation is.
Just as is the case with many of the mysteries of the pronunciation of the name Yod-He-Vav-He and many other Hebrew words, it comes down to interpretation of evidence. And only when we find Moses' tape recorder will all of these questions be answered.
Well, we may not be able to answer all of the questions, but we can understand how God's name was pronounced. That I can assure you. At least a very close approximation. Mostly for Yahweh, but Yehoshua or Yeshua, probably a little bit harder. But either way, the point is this. The Masoretes created modern Hebrew. See my video on the Masoretic for that. Hebrew went through many stages, like any language, really, but it had also other things like, people conquering the Hebrews and the Jews, and a lot of dispersions, Hellenization. It was a lot of stuff going on. Paleo-Hebrew eventually migrated into an Aramaic type of square script, which migrated into Mishnaic script, which wrote the Mishnah and the Gemara and things like that. And eventually you had the Masoretic text, which was solidified around, I think, the 9th or 10th or 11th century, something like that, by the Masoretes. And of course, there's a lot with that because the Masoretic alphabet is not just a regular alphabet, it's a magical alphabet. And so there's a lot of suspicious things about it. But anyway, because the vowels were never written down, pronunciation that you see in modern Hebrew is all based on the Masoretic text. It's all based on what those scribes decided the pronunciation was. And in certain cases, it's obvious that they're just deciding it. They're not actually going based off of evidence, like with the 2 vav examples. Because if it's 1 vav in the old, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are older than Mishnaic Hebrew, Masoretic Hebrew for sure, they're older. Now, who knows what exactly they are, but they're certainly older than Masoretic text, it seems. Either way, with 1 vav, it seems that the possibility could be an A sound. Well, okay, that changes your whole theory, because instead of Yehovah, it could be Yahweh. Right? It could be a Yah, not a Yeh. Do you get the point? This is the issue. The problems are as follows. There's a variation in the Yod, the first letter. It could be Yah or Yeh. It could be Yahweh or Yehovah. So which one is it? Is it Yah or is it Yeh? There's also the inconsistency of the usage of the third letter, Vav. Is it V? Is it Wow? Okay, and if that's the case, what is the vowel in between? Is it O? Is it U? Is it Yahweh? Is it Yehovah? Is it Yahuwah? What is it? Right? So there's not a consistency in the usage of Vav, and the first letter, Yod, can also be Yeh or Yah. Nehemiah Gordon argues the rabbinic tradition, obviously, and secret knowledge being revealed. But others have shown that things like the Dead Sea Scrolls, I almost said Deep State because I have DSS here. I'm like, Deep State Scrolls, what the heck? Dead Sea Scrolls, that this is not true. It's not. It's simply not true because the archaeological evidence doesn't support it. You have many words where there is an intended of sound. In the older texts, you have 2 vavs in a row. Therefore, we would assume, to be consistent grammatically, there would be always two vavs in a row where there is an issue of the sound of. You're trying to create the sound of. You're going to use two vavs in a row. But that's not the case, meaning all these words where the Masoretes assumed it was an ov because of whatever rabbinic traditions, they're not necessarily of. There may be there may be who knows? The point is they don't know. But they're making it seem like they know, and it's this absolute tradition. Oh, you can trust the Jews, and so on and so forth. Whereas the Masoretic text alone, with the issues with Christ and Christology, gives you much to be desired in that regard. Now, I'm not saying the Deep State Scrolls are necessarily as old as they are, or that they should be propped up as this thing, but they were an important discovery, and they cast doubt on Nehemiah Gordon's theory, which can be very compelling because he's very intelligent. And of course, he appeals to secret knowledge, and everybody likes that kind of stuff. You have to remember that original Hebrew went out of usage in 200 BC to about 70 AD. Like by 70 AD, like it's done. People were Greek speakers. The temple was destroyed. The Jews were dispersed. They had 2 more revolts after that, and they were done. Original Hebrew were pictograms, as in pictures, but the pictures weren't pictures like of what the pictures mean. They were rather, it's an interesting thing. We'll look at some stuff about that. The pictures were there because this is another thing we need to kind of expose and be really clear on. The pictograms in original Hebrew are not pictograms that a picture of something based on what it means. It's a picture of something based on how it sounds to remind you of the sound of the word. We'll look into that a little bit later. But they do point to Christ with the behold the hand, behold the nail. There's a narrow road to walk on there as well. It's interesting. However, we also have to acknowledge the legitimate rebuttals to some of these arguments from Jews and from other people who are not even caring about the Old Testament, but nevertheless they're scholars and they have legitimate rebuttals. So all of that will make sense in the future when we get to some of this stuff at the end. But anyway, this is why this is such a challenge. It really requires you to dig into a lot of evidence, and hopefully we'll be making sense of it soon in this particular presentation. We will find the answer today, but you need to see all these weeds that are around you so that you don't get lost in them as we go. That's why I'm taking the liberty and the time to go through all of them. Remember also that the Masoretes were Pharisees who rejected Jesus. So there's several things wrong with using them as the source because the Masoretic text is corrupt. We don't trust rabbis. They put a curse on Daniel's prophecy. They changed the Masoretic text. The Talmud has many antichrist things that it teaches. They made new translations after Jesus to try to discredit him and discredit the Septuagint. They declared the 2 powers in heaven a heresy, whereas the people believed in 2 Yahwehs. The Masoretic alphabet is the magical alphabet. They do sigils and magical spells, and the occult uses it. So there's a lot to be, suspicious of when we're talking about rabbinic sources. Now, another thing that's important is that Nehemiah Gordon rejects Jesus. This is from Hermeneutics. This is Christianity Stack Exchange. These are good things to look into, like forums. If you have a question, Hermeneutics or Christianity Stack Exchange, very useful. Question: does Nehemiah Gordon self-identify as a Christian? Does Nehemiah Gordon self-identify as a Christian? Does he believe that Yeshua is the Christ? I heard that his conversion story exists on the internet, but I am unable to find it. If someone can help me find it, that would be great. I found an article that examines the beliefs of Nehemiah Gordon and briefly mentions that although brought up in an Orthodox Jewish family, he converted to Karaite Judaism, which again, Karaites reject the oral tradition. They're all about the Torah, which is even more of a testimony against him, and you'll understand why. After he moved to Israel in 1983, the article gives a critical overview of Nehemiah Gordon's book, The Hebrew Yeshua versus the Greek Jesus. Apparently, he rejects Jesus as the Messiah. Quote, I still do not believe Yeshua to be the Messiah. Like all Karaites, I eagerly await the coming of the anointed Davidic king, who will reign as king over Israel, ushering in an era of eternal peace. It seems more and more that Yeshua may have been a first-century Karaite opposing man-made laws of rabbis and returning people to the Torah. So Jesus was a good teacher. For the purpose of answering your question, it would seem that Nehemiah Gordon does not believe that the Jesus of the New Testament is the Christ or Messiah. So Nehemiah Gordon, who is a Karaite Jew, meaning they reject the oral tradition of the rabbis and they go with the Torah as their objective source, which is a good thing. Yet, this is why I said it testifies more against him. At least with the Orthodox Jews and all these Jews that use like a billion things as authoritative, you could say, okay, well, you're just really deceived. I understand. I can understand why you could reject Jesus because you think everything is authoritative. You don't value the scriptures as the word of God. That makes sense that you would reject Jesus. But a Karaite Jew, in some sense, even though it seems, oh, well, they're more noble because they, value the scriptures as the word of God only. They don't deal with all these oral traditions. Okay, seems more noble, but actually it's not. It's even worse in some sense because the Torah testifies of Jesus. And yet you claim to be with the Torah and yet you reject Jesus. That means you have a serious problem in your hermeneutic and your understanding. He makes his argument. The funny thing is that he makes his argument based on these rabbis and these rabbinic traditions, even though he's a Karaite Jew. So that's just weird. He rejects Jesus, even though the scriptures testify of Jesus. So this man, even though he's very intelligent, obviously, he's very confused. To me, that's just, how can you have such untenable positions and such inconsistent way of thinking? Just shows that you're very confused. And not in like, I'm trying to insult him anyway, but you are confused when you are playing for two teams simultaneously. It doesn't make sense. So Nehemiah Gordon, I don't really trust Nehemiah Gordon, nor rabbis, nor the Masoretic text, or anything coming from that particular part of town. Now, let's talk about Yah versus Yeh. Yah versus Yeh. Which one is it? Nehemiah says it starts with Yeh, like Yehovah, but this is wrong based on the evidence. One piece of evidence that we have, which is easy, is Hallelujah, praise be to Yah, as in Yahweh. That's a common word that's been around forever. And of course, what that means is that it's very likely to be Yah, not Yeh. Also, Egyptians called the God of the Israelites Yahweh. Where is it at? I love archaeology, especially when God preserves his word in just ways that you never expect. This is from the Institute of Biblical Archaeology, the Soleb inscription, earliest discovered use of the name Yahweh. Did the Exodus really happen? If so, when? Scholars have long theorized about the historicity and dating of the Exodus. Some believe it happened in the mid-15th century BC, based primarily on biblical information. Many believe it happened 2 or 3 centuries later, based more on select archaeological information. It happened around 1400 BC, just so you're aware. And Patterns of Evidence has a wonderful series on the Exodus with great evidence. Many more believe it never happened at all. What is the answer? Is the biblical narrative true? Is it only partly true? Or is it completely fictional? Archaeology alone may never settle those questions conclusively. However, one critical archaeological discovery indicates there may be more historical truth to the biblical Exodus account, particularly the early biblical literal date, i.e. the 1400 BC date that the Patterns of Evidence provides. On the west bank of the Nile in northern Sudan stands the ruin of an ancient Egyptian town called Soleb. Europeans first learned of it when a Swiss traveler named John Lewis, my goodness, these motorcycles, I don't know if you can hear, hopefully you can't hear them, but they're just buzzing around. This John Lewis guy, Burckhardt, explored the region of Nubia in 1813. However, Soleb was not excavated until a century and a half later, from 1957 to 1963, by an archaeologist named Michela Schiff Giorgini. Giorgini's excavation primarily focused on a temple complex dating to the reign of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, who reigned sometime in the late 15th century to 14th century BC. This temple was undoubtedly built to honor the pharaoh. Its courtyard walls are inscribed with scenes of Hebsed festival, an Egyptian celebration traditionally held in the 13th year of the monarch's reign. Its many pillars bear images of the people he supposedly conquered. For example, one pillar pictures an African prisoner kneeling with his hands tied behind his back. Another pictures a Semitic captive in the same position. In fact, the whole inner chamber was a symbolic representation of Amenhotep's military conquests. Pictures of his subjugated northern enemies face northward, those of his southern enemies face southward, and so on. Of course, as far as can be determined, it's all propaganda. Only one military campaign of Amenhotep III is known, his 5-year suppression of a rebellion in Kush. The other conquests are likely fabricated or greatly exaggerated, which is important to understand. A lot of these pagan cultures exaggerated quite a bit, which is going to come in handy when we talk about Yahweh and paganism. This is consistent with our knowledge of other kings from the time period. However, the pillars of Soleb do at least accurately identify Egypt's enemies. The Egyptians might have exaggerated their conquests, but they certainly didn't decorate their temples with pictures of fictional adversaries. In this sense, the Soleb temple inscriptions provide accurate historical and geographical data. As it turns out, one pillar at Soleb bears a cartouche, a term for an oval-shaped hieroglyphic inscription, of enormous biblical significance. It is badly damaged. Originally, the cartouche would have been accompanied by an image of a kneeling slave, matching the other pillars. However, only the cartouche in the prisoner's hands are still visible. Even the cartouche itself has been vandalized by locals within the past century. However, the inscription is still visible. It translates to the land of Shasu of Yahweh. Almost all scholars believe the Egyptian word Shasu should be translated as cattle-herding nomads, or simply nomads. More significant, though, is the other name in the inscription. Yahweh undoubtedly refers to the God of the Hebrews, mentioned over 6,800 times throughout the Bible. A few scholars have argued that Yahweh would be a place name, since most of the other Egyptian enemies inscribed on Soleb's pillars are identified by their dwelling places. For example, one pillar depicts the people of Megiddo. However, this theory is highly unlikely. As archaeologist Titus Kennedy notes, there's no topographical site in the entire region with the name Yahweh or anything similar. So the people who, I think there's another article somewhere we'll look at where some will say, oh, this is the location. It's not. There is no such location ever mentioned. It's a person. It's a being. It's a deity. Who could the nomads of Yahweh refer to other than the Israelites of the Hebrew Bible? Since the only ancient people known have worshipped a deity named Yahweh in ancient times were the Hebrews or Israelites, wrote Kennedy. And also, by the way, Shasu, if Shasu refers to cattle herding, this is another interesting detail, but the Israelites were dairy drinkers because Abraham had curds and whey when he's serving God, when he came to have dinner with him. He had curds and whey, and so curds as in, dairy. So they were dairy farmers. They had cows, they had goats, and so on and so forth. So that's an interesting point. Moving on. It also logically follows that these particular Shasu nomads associated with Yahweh could be identified with the early Israelites before they became a sedentary population in Canaan. The Soleb inscription is even more biblically significant than it at first appears. To understand why, consider the broad outline of the biblical Exodus narrative. According to a literal reading of 1 Kings 6:1, applied to widely recognized date for the construction of Solomon's temple, the dramatic exodus from Egypt following the 10 plagues is said to have happened around 1446 BC, during the middle part of the 15th century, with the Israelites arriving in Canaan 40 years later at the end of that century. How much of this exodus and sojourn account is true? Again, archaeology alone can't prove every detail, but even leaving aside all other archaeological evidence, which is a significant amount, the Soleb inscription alone supports the backbone of the narrative. Consider this. If the Soleb inscription really refers to the Israelites, as it almost certainly does, the Egyptians must have heard of the Israelites and their God by at least the end of the 15th century BC. This is significant. In the Exodus account, when Moses first asked Pharaoh to release the Israelites, Pharaoh responded, "Who is the Lord, i.e. Yahweh? Who is Yahweh, that I should hearken unto his voice and to let Israel go? I know not Yahweh." Exodus 5. Not only that, but even Moses and the Israelites had not known the name before this time. When in Exodus 6, God says, "My name Yahweh, I was not known to them." Yeah, because before Moses, he did not reveal that part of himself. Exodus 6, verse 3. By the time the Temple of Soleb was built in circa 1400 BCE, Egypt's Pharaoh had certainly heard of Yahweh, because the Exodus had already happened. This requires a significant degree of explaining away from those who date the Exodus to the 13th century, which again proves the biblical and the archaeological evidence. Everything lines up, folks. I have yet to find something in archaeology or history that disproves the Bible. I really do. It's just such a profound thing. Furthermore, this inscription indicates that by around the 1400s BC, the Egyptians considered Israel sufficient enough of a threat. Otherwise, why memorialize them along with other adversaries? Yeah. Why would you prop up something in stone around, your adversaries if they weren't a threat. If Egypt considered Israel a threat, then the Israelites must have been numerous, not dozens. Hundreds or even a few thousand people, as minimalists often contend. Yeah, there were hundreds of thousands. There's, I think, a few million that left Egypt, if you consider the mixed multitude. They also must have done something to provoke Egypt's hatred. In addition, do you see also, again, the consistent, just another break here, but do you see the consistent thread where God uses the hatred and the jealousy or whatever else of these Antichrist pagans to preserve his word? It's just so, I love how it's like God has a sense of humor. He uses the rabbis who translated Matthew's gospel to preserve Jesus' genealogy. He uses the Egyptians to immortalize the Exodus and so on and so forth. So it's just so funny. I love that. I love finding these little gems. In addition, the Israelites must have been unique from the people around them. Other Shasu peoples besides Shasu of Yahweh are mentioned on the pillars and walls of Soleb. However, many of these other Shasu are listed in conjunction with specific cities or regions. This indicates that their nomadic wanderings were relatively contained. So because these other people who are also Shasu are mentioned in connection to towns or villages, and the Shasu of Yahweh are not, it means that these people were very nomadic. They didn't have a place of their own, which is further evidence that they were the Israelites. By contrast, the nomads of Yahweh are given no geographic label. Instead, they are identified only with the deity they worshipped. This indicates that their wanderings weren't confined to an infinite, identifiable region. It doesn't say that doesn't the Bible say that we're sojourners in this land, in this slice of history, just like Abraham? We're sojourners. You're not identified by your worldly place. You're identified by your relationship to Yahweh. So profound. It may also indicate that the religious worship of the Shasu was likely their most distinct and outstanding feature, at least to the Egyptians. Lastly, the Israelites must have been located geographically north of Soleb. Remember how each pillar inscription of Soleb faces the dwelling place of the people it depicts? The Yahweh inscription faces directly north, indicating the nomads of Yahweh lived somewhere north of Soleb, which would be Canaan. In short, the Soleb inscription indicates that around 1400 BC, a nomadic people was on the scene to the north. Their distinguishing feature was their god, Yahweh. They were known, hated, and perhaps even feared in Egypt, and they were numerous, so numerous that the Egyptian empire considered them a threat. Sound familiar? It should. So the Soleb inscription, 1400 BC, that's older, it's 3,000 plus years old, older than practically everything we got, tells you what? Tells you that God's name is Yahweh. So it's not Yeh, it's Yah, just like hallelujah. So very, very important thing, because if it was Yeh, they would have described it with a E, Yeh. So Yah is very likely the first vowel of God's name. It's not Yeh, but Yah. And we'll see further confirmation of this in the future. The challenge is that some names, like Yeshua, suggest Yeh. But there's a grammatical reason for this, because the placement of all the names in the Bible have to do with God. Eliashu, Yah saves, Yeshua, Nehemiah, right? Wherever the Yah is, wherever God is in that name, depends on how it's pronounced. If it's towards the beginning, you'll see that the names using Yah in the beginning turn to Yeh, like Yeshua. That's why, by the way, it's not Yahushua, it's not Yahshua, it's Yeshua. However, that's an exception. Yah, the root, is Yah, because everywhere else the word is used towards the middle or to the end, it's always Yah. And that's confirmed by the Egyptian inscription, that's confirmed by Hallelujah, contextual clues, and name clues you'll see in future places. However, at the beginning, when we see it in Yeshua's name, it's also important to remember that there's no H, like these, there's no hard H in these names. There's not like Yahushua or Yahweh. Don't do the H. You'll learn very shortly that it's actually very profound and very simple. It's just 4 vowels. So the historical evidence is that the first vowel is actually Yah, not Yeh. Now let's look at mater lectionis. This is something we mentioned previously. And what is it? Some people bring it up and say, this is proof that we know how to pronounce God's name. Well, again, narrow road approach. A mater lectionis, Latin for mother of reading, is any consonant that is used to indicate a vowel, primarily in the writing of Semitic languages such as Arabic, Hebrew, and Syriac. The letters that do this in Hebrew are aleph, which came later, by the way, but originally you had he, vav, and yod, with the latter two in particular being more often vowels than they are consonants. So yod and vav, remember the issue with yod and vav? They're often more vowels than they are consonants. So when you have two yods, it was ov, but if it's just one, it could be ya, it could be ye, it could be anything. But if it's two yods in a row, it's usually ov. Grammatical rules have to be understood and put on the table, because ultimately when you take somebody's word for it, okay, the rabbis say, oh, it's ov according to these little squiggles that we made in 1000 AD. Well, what was it pronounced before that? The people who wrote the scriptures before that didn't pronounce it the way you did, obviously. In Arabic, the matrilecciones, though they are much less often referred to thus, are aleph, wav, and ya. The original value of the matrilecciones corresponds closely to what is called in modern linguistics, glides or semivowels. A glide is, what's a glide? I forgot. In phonetics and phonology, a semivowel glide or semiconsonant is a sound that is phonetically similar to a vowel sound but functions as the syllable boundary. That's right, rather than as the nucleus of a syllable. Examples of semivowels in English are the consonants Y and W in yes and west, respectively. So we have similar things in English where you have this thing is a consonant, but it can also be a vowel. So it's kind of like either there or there. It's gray. It's not black or white. But it delineates the boundary between the consonant and the vowel. So it's a boundary word. It acts as a consonant, but it can also be a vowel. So we have similar things in English. Because the scripts used to write some Semitic languages lack vowel letters, unambiguous reading of a text might be difficult. Therefore, to indicate vowels, mostly long vowels, consonant letters are used. For example, in the Hebrew construct state from bet, meaning the house of, the middle letter in the spelling bet, bet, acts as a vowel. Yod he, I think it's hey. I think it's hey that this is. Acts as a vowel because it's bait. But in the corresponding absolute state from bait, house, which is spelled the same letter represents a genuine consonant. Matrilecciones are extensively employed only in Hebrew. So what was this last point? So you have bait in the construct state versus the absolute state, where bait, this is just like Y functions in English, where there's a boundary between two vowels. Whereas in this, construct state, what does the construct state mean? The first noun in a genitive phrase that consists of a possessed noun by a possessor, yada, yada, yada. For example, Arabic and Hebrew, the word queen standing alone is malika and malka. Different forms. So in one form, it functions as a vowel, and in another form, it functions as a consonant. Just like we have Y and W in our own English language, although probably not to the extent of Hebrew, for sure. Matrilecciones are extensively employed only in Hebrew, Aramaic, Syriac, and Arabic, but the phenomenon is also found in Ugaritic, Moabite, South Arabian, and Phoenician alphabets. Origins and development. Historically, the practice of using matrilecciones seems to have originated when I and all diphthongs written with yod and vav, consonant letters respectively, monophthonized to simple long vowels a or o. This epiphenomenal association between consonant letters and vowel sounds was then seized upon and used in the words with historic diphthongs. The diphthong is where you have a change from one vowel to another. A, O, those are diphthongs. And English has a lot of diphthongs. But monophthonized, let's see what that is. A sound change by which a diphthong becomes a monophthong, a type of vowel shift. It is also known as ungliding, as diphthongs are also known as gliding vowels. In languages that have undergone monophthonization, my goodness, digraphs, something or other, I can't read the rest of that. Digraphs that formally represent diphthongs, yada, yada. So there's a process that basically made the use of these letters the way they are used because of the need to express different combinations of vowels. In general terms, it is observable that early Phoenician texts have very few matrilecciones, meaning these letters that can function as as vowels, even though they're consonants. And that during most of the first millennium BCE, Hebrew and Aramaic were quicker to develop matras lecciones than Phoenician. Little quick pause. You have to remember English is a very new language. Okay, so when people were developing ways to label sounds and meanings, it was a constant evolution. And if you needed certain sounds to be expressed as your language got more complicated to reflect your reality, the language changes just like we have today. Like 100 years ago, people didn't know what an emoji is. Now we have how many, I think there's some, I forget how many words there are, but it's thousands, I don't know how many thousands of words get added to the vocabulary of English every, year or decade or whatever. Because these new technologies that come out, like I sent you a GIF. What does that mean? What does that mean you sent me a GIF? 100 years ago, people would have been like, what? What's a GIF? Right? Emoji. What's an emoji? Oh, that made me LOL. What? What do you mean that made you LOL? What does that even mean? So these types of things are very common in all language. And so as the language developed, there was more matras lecciones being added, meaning letters that could double as vowels and so on. However, in its latest period of development in North Africa, referred to as Punic, Phoenician developed a very full use of matras lecciones, including the use of the letter ayin, also used for the purpose much later in Yiddish orthography. In pre-exilic Hebrew, there was a significant development of the use of the letter he to indicate word final vowels other than I and U. So Yod He, the second letter of God's name, that was developed eventually to indicate different vowels other than E or U. This was probably inspired by the phonological change of the third person singular possessive suffix from ahu to aw to o in most environments. So language developed to change a little bit, and so certain tools needed to be added. However, in later periods of Hebrew, the orthography was changed so word final O was no longer written with hey, except in a few archaical spelled proper names such as Solomon and Shiloh. The difference between the spelling of the third person singular possessive suffix as attached to singular nouns with hey in early Hebrew versus with the yod in later Hebrew has become an issue in the authentication of the Jehoash inscription. According to Sass, already in the Middle Kingdom, there were some cases of matras lecciones, i.e. consonant graphemes, which were used to transcribe vowels in foreign words, namely in Punic, Jensen, Aramaic, and Hebrew, sometimes with the Aleph. Aleph, remember, came later with the Aramaic. Nave notes that the earliest Aramaic and Hebrew documents already used matras lecciones. Some scholars argue that the Greeks must therefore have borrowed their alphabet from the Arameans. However, the practice has older roots, as the Semitic cuneiform alphabet of Ugarit, 13th century BC, already had matras lecciones. We'll read about that in just a second as well. Hebrew. The earliest method of indicating some vowels in Hebrew writing was to use the consonant letters Yod, Vav, and He. And Aleph, which again, Aleph came later, of the Hebrew alphabet to also write long vowels in some cases. Originally, Aleph and He were only used as matras lecciones at the end of words, and Yod and Vav were used mainly to write the original diphthongs, all and I. All right, so a diphthong, when you combine two vowels like all and a, or e, or I, actually a, o and a, like Yahweh, as well as the original vowel y plus vowel sequences, which sometimes simplified to plain long vowels. Gradually, as it was found to be insufficient for differentiating between similar sounds, Yod and Vav were also inserted to mark some long vowels of non-diphthongal origin. So this comes now to the Dead Sea Scrolls, where they were using two Vavs in order to specify this. The pronunciation is Ov in this case. So in just in case you didn't know whether it's an A or an E or whatever, this is Ov. When there's two Vavs in a row, that delineates Ov. But remember, we didn't see that with Yahweh's name, so Nehemiah Gordon is wrong. If words can be written with or without matras lecciones, spellings that include the letters are called male or plene, Latin, meaning full, and spellings without them are called hasher or defective. In some verb forms, matras lecciones are almost always used. Around the 9th century CE, it was decided that the system of matras lecciones did not suffice to indicate the vowels precisely enough for the purposes of liturgical recitation of biblical text. So a supplemental vowel pointing system, the nikud, the diacritic symbols, which the Masoretes developed, and other important phonological features not written by the traditional basic orthography, joined Matras Lectiones as part of the Hebrew writing system. In layman's terms, the Masoretes didn't know how to pronounce certain words, so they basically made it up. They figured out their own pronunciation, and they made tradition, and they listened to probably Pharisaic traditions. Oh, this is how it's pronounced because you can differentiate certain words, and it's a made-up thing. When you look at pronunciation in the Hebrew text, it could be right. I'm not saying everything is questionable, but at the same time, everything is questionable. We don't know. Like hallelujah is an easy one, but a lot of words we just don't know. That's something to remember about this pronunciation stuff. So when people quote Hebrew or, oh, it says in the Hebrew here, well, what do you mean it says in the Hebrew? You're reading the Masoretic Hebrew, which, remember, Hebrew doesn't have vowels. The vowels that you see in English when it's transliterated, it's based on Masoretic pronunciation. In some words in Hebrew, there is a choice of whether to use a mater lectionis or not, and in modern printed text, mater lectionis are sometimes used even for short vowels, which is considered to be grammatically incorrect according to traditional norms, though instances are found as far back as Talmudic times. So nobody knows left or right with this stuff because it's super complicated. Again, English, we have the luxury of it being developed along with the printing press and all these other things, whereas these ancient languages, they're very complicated. Such texts from the Judea and Galilee were noticeably more inclined to Malay spellings than texts from Babylonia. Similarly, in the Middle Ages, Ashkenazi Jews, ding, 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 tended to use Malay spellings under the influence of European languages. But Sephardi Jews tended to use Hasher spellings under the influence of Arabic. Are you seeing why this whole pronunciation stuff is it's just a ball of, weeds to navigate through because there's so much to get lost in. So much history and tradition. Most commonly, Yod indicates I or A, while Vav indicates O or U. Aleph was not systematically developed as a mater lectionis in Hebrew, unlike Aramaic and Arabic, but it is occasionally used to indicate a vowel. However, a silent aleph indicating an original glottal stop, consonant sound that has become silent in some contexts in Hebrew pronunciation, can occur after almost any vowel. So if you have a silent aleph, you have something that in English you can't really do, which is a glottal stop, if you know what that is. And at the end of a word, he can also be used to indicate the vowel A or E should be pronounced. Read in the order that they are, it would be Yahweh. Yod Aleph Vav He resembles the name Yahweh. Interesting. Keep that in mind. Gives you a couple examples, and this is the problem, folks. Let's see if we can. Here's your matras lecciones, meaning the consonants that can act as vowels. Okay, you have the yod. Well, the yod can tell you what vowel formation can it make. Well, it can go e, a. You have aleph, which can be silent. It could be a glottal stop, or it could also be all these pronunciations: long vowels, short vowels. I haven't been in my linguistics class for probably over 20 years, so I forget how to pronounce these, but they're basically long or short vowels. Vav can be O or U. He can be E, A, or O. So the he, depending on how it's occurring, could be O, E, or A. Yehovah, Yahuwah, Yahuwah. Depends what the context is, right? So how do we know? Well, we can slowly dissect this and piece together the puzzles. We know so far that the first vowel is Ya. It's not Ye. That's very clear from the Egyptian inscription in 1400 BC, from Hallelujah, and from other places we'll look that keep confirming that the first vowel is Ya, not Ye. So, what do we take from mater lectionis? Well, it's a system to denote the pronunciation of vowels. And some people say that it proves there was a specific way to pronounce God's name, probably referring to the last thing I just read, which is that if you read the vowels in order, it's Yahweh, which is true. That is how you pronounce God's name. We're going to read something about it in just a second. But the point is this: the development of a language is very complex. especially when you're dealing with ancient languages. English itself has had a lot of changes, and English is a new language. But English was also developed in a very technologically different context. It's the language of business. It's very clear. It's very simple. And even so, English has a lot of weird rules to begin with. If you ever learned English as a second language, you know what I'm talking about. Ancient Hebrew was very different. Grammatically, with root words, without having consonants or without having vowels, very different. Israelites had a lot of political turmoil on top of that, with all the social political changes that happened constantly in that area. You have the functionality of vowels that could go either way, plus political changes, plus all this changing from, Paleo-Hebrew to Aramaic script to so on and so forth. What does that equal? Well, it equals that you have pronunciation being lost in translation. You really do. The pronunciation you have today that you read in the interlinears that's transliterated is from the Masoretic text. I'm not saying that everything you read that's transliterated is pronounced incorrectly. I'm also not saying that everything you read is pronounced correctly. So the narrow road is between those two extremes. And that's the thing to remember, because a lot of people put the Masoretic text as some authority, objective authority on pronunciation, but these things have been lost, folks. These things have been lost, and so unless you are a Hebrew scholar, and even Nehemiah, who is very well educated, maybe too well educated is the problem, obviously is being rebutted or refuted by other people. So it's a can of worms, and certainly if that's your thing, I definitely encourage you to look into it. But the point is that the Masoretic text is not to be trusted as an absolute authority. We don't know how things were pronounced exactly, because that's all we have is the Masoretic rabbinical tradition. So does mater lectionis prove anything? Well, no, not really. It just proves the opposite. It proves that pronunciation has been obscured by history and that it's very complicated and it's very difficult to understand how to pronounce words, because each one of those maters lectionis, the consonants acting as vowels, could go like in 3 different directions. Multiply that by 4 possibilities, you have a ton of possibilities. But now we can clear this up a little bit more with Josephus. This is an article called The Pronunciation of Divine Name. And ultimately, a lot of the confusion with the Tetragrammaton is that the letters are written as consonants in our English language. However, they're actually representing 4 vowels. It's all vowels. There's no consonants in God's name, which is an interesting spiritual point too. We'll touch on later. Josephus mentioned this in his writings, and there's a lot to discuss with that. So this is from torahtimes.org. And it says, the divine name is pronounced Iau-e, or Iau-ai, or A, I should say, because it's like bay. E as in feet, A as in bay. It is usually spelled consonantly as YHWH or YHVH. The Y is pronounced, and the more correct one I would say is YHWH. Let's just put that out there. Because in English, even though in Hebrew the Vav can be a W or a V, in English when you write it with a V, you're mispronouncing it, because a V is a consonant. A V is not a vowel. Does that make sense? Whereas the W could be a consonant or a vowel. So it's more accurate in terms of relating it to the Hebrew, because it's a vowel. There's all 4 vowels. Of course, H is not a vowel either, but the point is that when you spell it with a V, you're aligning with the rabbinic traditions and the mistranslations, Jehovah, Yehovah, and so on. So don't do that. It's YHWH. And it's pronounced Yahweh, Yahweh. Yahweh. You'll see how it looks like. We'll go through a very specific pronunciation. The Y is pronounced as in lily or yes. The Vav, the W or Vav, it acts as a vowel here, and in fact is a shurik written fully. If we are to express it as YHVH, or a Vav pronounced U as in boot. If we are to write it as YHWH. You will notice that all of the consonants are vocalized as vowels, since according to Josephus, the divine name was 4 vowels. Josephus was both a priest and a Pharisee. The fact that the divine name has 4 vowels shows that the pronunciation of Yahweh or Yehovah is wrong. And for those who must argue the vav was not anciently wow, I will say that vav only needed to be rendered as a shurik to turn it into the necessary vowel. Shurik is a way of writing a particular one of these consonants to make it into a vowel or a consonant. Remember, they have different ways. So people saying that it's vav, it's not substantiated, or pronounced v, it's not substantiated because the older evidence consistently points to the same thing, which is that it's a vowel, not a consonant in this particular rendition. Remember, if there was two vavs, then there would be some sort of consonantal sound, ov. But there's only one vav, meaning it's a vowel. The spelling, YHVH, comes from the German JHWH or JHVH, in which the language J was pronounced Y and W as V. The V, this is, by the way, remember when the Ashkenazi were using European pronunciations and that was influencing them, and the Jews were living in Europe and so on and so forth. So anyway, the V sound is in turn derived from the Old Latin, in which language V and U were the same letter, which no doubt is the source of the Ashkenazi confusion. That the wow or vav is a vowel in the divine name is further proven by the fact that the names of many of the prophets, like Eliyahu, end in a shurik vav or a shurik wow. By the way, and you'll see examples of these prophets, you'll see how it is, how the vav is a vowel. By the way, the accent in the divine name is on the last syllable. That is why there is a short vowel on the first syllable. So it's not Yahuwah, it's Yahweh, Yahweh, Yahweh. Clement of Alexandria spelled the divine name Yahweh, I-A-O-U-E, and Yahweh, I-A-O-U-A-I. Remember iota, alpha, omega in the Septuagint in the Greek in 100 BC? That's evidence 1. Egyptian inscription, Yahweh, evidence 2. Hallelujah, evidence 3, in other words, having to do with Yah. Clement of Alexandria, very early church, in the Greek transliterated to Yahweh or Yahweh. And of course, Josephus is a fifth witness who is very, he's a Pharisee. He was a priest and a Pharisee. And he says it's 4 vowels and it's Yahweh. Which is pronounced in Greek, Yahweh, or just as in Hebrew, Yahweh. Probably the variation Yahweh is more correct than Yahweh. So in English, I'll give you a pronunciation guide and I'll put these on the page for this in the Bible study section. But it's not an like meh, it's a like be, Yahweh, Yahweh. And the accent is on the second syllable, Yahweh, Yahweh. The spelling Yahbe, I-A-B-E, found in some places is due to the fact that the ancient Greek B carried the same value as the Latin V. Spanish uses B for B and V interchangeably also. So you see, languages have all their peculiarities that you have to understand. Strictly speaking, this translation is an error, but since the Latin V and U were the same, we can see why it happened. So when you had the scriptures being translated from Latin or from Hebrew to Greek and Greek to Latin and all these languages happening, some of the scribal errors point to the fact that, again, that this is the case, because you had some Greek spellings, I-A-B-E, Yabe, which is an error. That doesn't make any sense. But if you understand that maybe it came from Latin, and of course Latin, V and B, or I should say V and U in Latin are the same, just like B and V in Spanish. So V and U in Latin are the same. So when the Greek person transliterating it from Latin to Greek saw I-A-V-E, Yahweh, which is really Yahweh in Latin, they wrote it in Greek I-A-B-E, because in Greek B and V are interchangeable. But in the process, they created an error because they didn't realize that the V in Latin is actually supposed to be a U sound. Does that make sense? So again, this is kind of how this stuff gets lost in translation over time. Josephus is commenting on Exodus 28, 36, 37. And thou shalt make a plate of pure gold and grave upon it the gravings of a signet, holiness to Yahweh. And thou shalt put on it blue lace, and that it may be upon the mitre, upon the forefront of the mitre it shall be. This is Aaron's outfit, high priestly outfit. This is Josephus' commentary. His head was covered by a tiara of fine linen, wreathed in blue, encircling which was another crown of gold, whereupon were embossed the sacred letters, to wit, 4 vowels. 4 vowels comprise God's name. And I think that's all I highlighted here. Yeah, you can see some old parchments and stuff. And again, these things change over time because of the changes in the language. But some more to read. This is the correct pronunciation of the proper name of the God of Abraham. So, yes, debate religion. Okay, this is the thing. I'm looking at my outline, and this URL is so long that it seemed like 2 URLs. So anyway, this is on Reddit, but it's a very, very well written post in Judaism. The consensus among most biblical scholars is that the correct pronunciation of the proper name of God of Abraham, known as the Tetragrammaton, has been lost. The agreed upon explanation is that the Jews developed the practice of not pronouncing it aloud out of respect for it around the 2nd century BC. Subsequently, I would like to discuss one possible pronunciation of the name based on an interpretation of Exodus, chapter 3, and based on a conjugation of the Hebrew verb hayah, to be, to exist. In Exodus 3, Moses asked the God of Abraham to provide a name so that he can provide the name of that to the Israelites when he relays to them he has been sent by that God to rescue them from slavery. In response, the God of Abraham says, Eyeh asher eyeh, I will be that I will be. The God then continues by saying the following, as if it's an explanation of what he meant when he said, Eyeh asher eyeh. So God says, say that I am sent them to you. And God said to Moses, so shall you say to the children of Israel, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is how I should be mentioned in every generation. So God gave Moses this name. God gave Moses this name. Hence it seems that the name Yahweh is related to the expression Eyeh asher eyeh. The expression is in the first person because it was said by the God itself. Himself, or I don't know if this person's a believer, but anyway. Therefore, we can conclude that the name is the third person equivalent of the expression, since a name is used to refer to someone in the third person when 2 or more parties are talking about them. When Moses would have spoken to the Israelites about the God that sent him, he would have obviously spoken about that God in the third person. Therefore, we should consider the third person equivalent of Eyeh, which means I will be or I will exist in Hebrew, and is gender neutral. According to the chart that can be viewed here at this link, we're not going to look at it, the third person equivalent is either Yiyeh, he it will be, or Tiyeh, she it will be. We can eliminate the latter because it begins with a tav equivalent to the English t rather than a yod, the equivalent of the English I or Y. We can eliminate also because whenever Yahweh is quoted as speaking in the Bible, he always uses masculine verbs to describe his actions. And because whenever he is spoken about in third person, masculine pronouns and verbs are used. Thank you. Subsequently, thus far we have Yiyeh as a third person equivalent to Eyeh as a basis for the pronunciation of the name. The Nehemiah Gordon article also spoke of these things. I say that it is the basis rather than the name itself because it's the equivalent spelling in English would be for YHYH rather than YHWH, which is the English equivalent of the name's 4 letters in Hebrew. This issue is easily solvable. However, in Hebrew, whenever a verb includes a yod, that is not the first letter, and the verb is converted to a name, the yod is converted to a vav. So again, you have these interchangeable consonants, these matrislaciones, that you have to understand when can they interchange. So let's read that again. In Hebrew, whenever a verb includes a yod, Y, that is not the first letter, and the verb is converted to a name, the yod is converted to a vav. For example, the Hebrew name kawa, Eve, ket plus vav plus he, is derived from the verb kaya, which means she, it, lives, and she's the mother of the living. It is spelled ket, yod, and he. Notice that the yod of kaya becomes a vav when converted to the name kawa. So Eve's name, Kawa, is ket vav he, but the root is ket yod and he. So it changes because it becomes a name from a yod to a vav. Does that make sense? So the name is kawa, which is ket vav he, KH, and H, ket vav he. It's based on the root word of kaya, which means she, it lives. That root word, remember every Hebrew word has a root word practically. The root word is ket yod he, KH, Y, and H. What changed between those two things? Well, the yod, the Y changed, the yod changed to a vav, which is a W, because it's a proper name. So that's something that happens. Notice the yod of kaya becomes a vav when converted to the name kawa. The same logic applies to the conversion of yiye, yod he, YH, to a name, which results in yiwe, yod he, vav he, YH. So because it's a proper name, we have a basis for understanding why it's actually YHWH. It's not V, by the way. We'll repeat that again. You'll see why. Because so far, everything we've looked at is all vowels. It's not V. V is a consonant. But it does change from the root word, which is yiye, I will be what I will be, into a proper name, which is Yahweh, which is the yod changes to a vav. The third letter changes to a vav. However, we're not done yet. Just as there is a rule via which a non-initial yod becomes a vav when converting a verb to a name, I presume that there are other rules via which vowels and other letters change. Let's consider the following theophoric names, meaning names that have God's name in it, and phrases that include the name Yahweh in them to deduce these rules. Here's the examples. Elijah is Eliyahu. My God is Yahweh. So Eliyahu. Isaiah, Yeshayahu. Yahweh is salvation. Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu. Yahweh will exalt. Joshua, Yehoshua. Yahweh is deliverance. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Praise be to Yah. So it's obvious that the vowels of the name change depending on whether it's at the front of the theophoric name or phrase, Yeho, like Yehoshua, or the back, Yahu, like Eliyahu, for example. And remember, I'm not a Hebrew fluent speaker. There's no hard H. It's not like Eliyahu. It's Eliyahu. Maybe there's a guttural in there somewhere, but these are vowels. Because again, God's name is all vowels. Or Yoshua. The sh has a guttural for sure. But when you have something like hallelujah, it's not hallelujah. It's hallelujah, alleluia. Or Yoshua. Or Yirmiyahu. Or Yeshayahu. The sh there has a guttural probably. Eliyahu is probably more correct. It's not Eliyahu, it's Eliyahu. So it's very beautiful, but ultimately it's been lost in translation. However, because some verbs precede the subject in Hebrew syntax, I think that the name Yirmiyahu is a good indication of what the vowels of the first two syllables of the name are, since the meaning of Yirmiyahu was Yahweh performing a verb, Yahweh will exalt. So Jeremiah, which is Yirmiyahu, Yahweh will exalt, gives us a clue. Hence, I believe that the first two syllables of the name are Yahu, which, by the way, this is something that reminds me. Some people believe that the reason that you have the word Yahu, which is derogatory, is a blaspheme against God, which I don't know. I haven't done research into that. It's certainly plausible from all the things that April Fools is designed to make you associate foolishness to April. And of course, what happened in April is the resurrection. 9/11, if you know about Jesus' birthday, maybe they made Yahoo to be like this derogatory term, which is really, Yahoo is the first two vowels of God's name. So I wouldn't put it past them, but either way, I'm not making a claim in that regard. I just think that's possible. So this results in Yahoo plus way from the Yiwei that we translated previously. So the root word, so now let's summarize this to kind of make sense of all this stuff. The root word is yiye, right? Yod he, Where is this at? Somewhere around here. Yeah, Yod-He, Yod-He, where are you at, Yod-He? Anyway, Yod-He, Yod-He, meaning YH, YH. Yeah, I will be what I will be, right? That's the root. Okay, so then the next part of that is that converts to a Vav when there's a name, when there's a personal name. So it's not YH, YH, but YH, WH. It's a Vav. Yod-He, Vav-He, Yahweh. And we also know from looking at how names are structured and how pronunciation rules are, is that there are certain sequences of vowels that follow based on how these names are pronounced, which leads us to find the truth, which is that the first two vowels are A and U, Yahu, Yahu, like Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, Yahweh will exult. Yahweh, Yahweh will exult. Well, Yirmi, Yahu, Yahu. That's not H, but Yahu. Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu, which is Jeremiah. So that gives us the clue, just like Isaiah, Yeshayahu. Yeshayahu. Again, Yahu, Yahu. Not Yahoo. It's hard to get out of that pronunciation because in English we have certain ways of saying things, but it's Yahu. Yahu. This results in combining the two things now, Yahu and then Wei, because of the Vav that changed from Yod to Vav. Now consider the Jewish historian Josephus Flavius described the name as follows, which we looked at, the four consistent vowels. This is consistent with Yahweh because it contains no consonants and can be written as I-A-U-E or Yahweh. But again, in English, if we say that, it would be a pure vowel, E-A-E-I-O-U, where really it's actually a diphthong, Yahweh, A. It starts as an E, but it goes in E. That's a diphthong. It's two vowels glued together, which you'll see. I think there's a spiritual reason for that too. I think it's just so profound and beautiful. But anyway, furthermore, consider that the equivalent of the name in Aramaic in the 1st century BCE was IAO, Iota Alpha Omega, which will look at a claim that this is a pagan solar deity as well. People are so confused on these things because they don't do enough digging. But this is the Aramaic IAO. When you had some earlier writings, we looked at a sample of that in one of those Wikipedia articles, which sounds very close to the first three vowels of Yahu, Yahweh. So the Aramaic, Josephus, the context of the Hebrew language as a whole is all pointing consistently to the same truth. Therefore, the correct pronunciation is Yahweh. Yahweh. There's no ch, there's no guttural, it's all vowels, which is very, very important. So, conclusion. I find it interesting that God's name is all vowels. Now, the reason I find that interesting, I said there's a spiritual reason for that, is that vowels require constant vocalization, energy. When you say a consonant like k, the breath stops. When you say a vowel, a, e, o, u, it's constant energy going outward. And of course, the way that it's structured, Yahweh, 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 do you understand? It can be repeated forever and ever. It goes into itself. Yahweh, Yahweh, Yahweh. Isn't that beautiful? That it goes into itself. It's I may be a nerd on this, but it reminds me of like the toroidal pattern, if you know what that is. It's a toroid. Like if you look at an apple, apples are toroids. If you look at magnetic fields, everything in the universe is a toroid, which of course is designed to point you to God, who is self-existent. He exists of himself. From himself, everything comes out and it comes back to himself, like a toroid. Of course, the toroid is a shadow of the truth, but the toroid is something designed to point you to the mind that developed all these things. A toroidal field is constantly flowing outward and back into itself. And this is what I think of when I think of God's name pronounced Yahweh. Yahweh, Yahweh. I just imagine those angels that are seraphim that are surrounding God 24/7 and just, pronouncing his name and just basically perfect. And that can be pronounced over and over again without ever stopping. Constant energy flow through through the vocal cords. And of course, I don't mean anything New Agey here. I just mean that even the very name, the way that it's physically pronounced, is a reflection of God's eternal, unchanging, self-existent character, which to me is just so profound. It's, the energy, the source of life, self-existence, it goes into itself. But Yahweh and Yahweh are both relatively accurate. I believe the longer vowel, the Yahweh versus Yahweh, is more correct, especially if obviously you're repeating it. So we have several pieces of evidence. We have Josephus, we have the early church records, we have Aramaic and 1st century BC Septuagint parchments that say iota, alpha, omega, which confirm the Yao, basically first three vowels. You have Hebrew names and Hebrew pronunciations of these various names, and something else I forgot. But anyway, we have tons of different pieces of evidence that point to the same thing. It's not Jehovah, it's not Yehovah, it's not Yahuwah or Yahweh, it's Yahweh, Yahweh. And of course, the accent is on the second part of that. It's not the first, it's not Yahweh, it's Yahweh, Yahweh. God's name is all vowels. Vowels also are important because the vowels make language possible. You ever thought about that? This is another interesting point. Vowels are the life between the consonants. You can't have a language without vowels. You can't have like you can't have words that way. You need vowels because vowels are the linking energy between all of these consonantal stops. They work together, but vowels are the thing that make language possible, which is fascinating because again, it's like God is the vowels, right? His name is all vowels, which, he's self-existent. He's a source of being. Vowels in language are necessitated for bringing words to life. Vowels are also not written in Hebrew, which is also interesting because God is very mysterious and he was hidden to mankind. Just like the vowels were not revealed in Hebrew, God was hidden to mankind until Jesus Christ. And of course, he was revealed to the Israelites, but nevertheless, he was gradually revealing himself. And I think it's very fitting that God's name is all vowels when vowels were hidden in Hebrew. Just so interesting. But nevertheless, the Old Testament is a type and shadow for the Word, which is revealed in Jesus. And of course, what is the Word is the name. It is God made flesh. So if we are going to write it, probably it would be I-A-O-U-E, all the vowels, or I-A-O-U-E-I. It would be like kind of a Greek spelling, Yahweh, just pronouncing it with pure vowels, except at the end. And this is a challenge for English speakers because in English, we don't really have too many pure vowels. Everything is a diphthong. We don't have A-E-I-O-U. We have A-E-I-O-U, right? More often than not. So you have to get used to that, but it's Yahweh. And I'll give you a pronunciation guide in just a second. If we write it in English, it would be Y-A-O-H-W-E-H, silent H's, Yahweh. Accent is on the last syllable. And let's take a look at this pronunciation guide. Where is it at? Here we go. So this is, can you see it? Yeah, you can. Okay. I-A-U-E, Yahweh. But again, probably the more accurate one is I to I, Yahweh. Nice and symmetrical. I love it. This is more of a phonetic spelling. The vowel pronunciations would be E like feet, ah like, you're saying ah, ooh like ooh wow, and A. But it's really A is the more accurate one, I believe. So either Yahweh or Yahweh. A little bit longer diphthong at the end. Yahweh, Yahweh. This is an O and a U kind of combined. Yahweh, Yahweh, Yahweh. It's easier when you say it quickly. If we write it in English, you could write it as Y-A-H-O-W-E-H, Yahweh. But again, people are going to be tempted to say Yahweh. There's no H. It says Yahweh, Yahweh, Yahweh. Silent H's, Yahweh, Yahweh. The accent is on the last syllable. So it's Yahweh not Yahweh. It's Yahweh. Yahweh, not Yahweh. Does that make sense? So colloquially saying Yahweh or spelling it Y-H-W-E-H is relatively accurate. It's not too far off from the truth. Just remember, it's all vowels and it can be sung. Yahweh, 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 Yahweh. You could just keep singing it, which is a beautiful thing. I think it's just so interesting that that's the case. Let's see here. Where are we at with our shindig here? So if you have said Yahweh, or spelled it like most people do, Y-A-H-W-E-H, this is a decent approximation, and you're not wrong. So don't listen to people who are trying to be legalistic about it and try to tell you it's Yahu, Shawashi, or Yahweh, or Yehovah, or Jehovah, or anything else. Don't use a strong H or guttural sounds, because this is false. And you'll see examples later of people pronouncing this and doing it right or wrong. Remember I said that Yehovah is an inversion of the truth? This is reading God's name backwards. And now we can prove it. Because the real name is Yahweh, meaning the vowels are A, O, A, right? A, O, A. Versus Yehovah, E, O, A. Do you see how it's opposite? It's like reading the God's name backwards, which to me, again, it just seems really strange, because we know all these inversions that happen, like with Hollywood and people reading things backwards, and we know that's a satanic thing. So ultimately, to me, who knows how far down the rabbit hole that goes, but at the very minimum, it shows you that the rabbis are very misguided and wrong, that they have it backwards. Literally, they have it backwards. So anything's possible with these things, but now you know how to pronounce the sacred name. It's Yahweh, Yahweh. Remember that even if you don't pronounce it exactly right, it doesn't matter, because we have Jesus and we have grace. Jesus is Yahweh revealed, and his name can be pronounced in many languages. Jesus, Jesus, Isa. It's great. God wants to have an intimate relationship with us because he's chosen to reveal himself. And if God has chosen to reveal himself, he looks on the heart. He doesn't care how you pronounce his name. He knows who are his, and he knows when people call on his name. You may not call on his name in perfect pronunciation in Hebrew, and that doesn't matter. What matters is your heart. So onward now onto some challenging aspects of this whole journey. Now that you have some context, we're going to get into some very nitty-gritty, crazy stuff. So the next one is part 5. Is Yahweh a pagan god?